True crime isn't always about everyday people. Sometimes the spotlight falls on the glamorous world of entertainment. From actresses to showgirls, fame and beauty couldn't protect these women from becoming targets of heartless violence. In this video, we uncover 5 terrifying true crime cases of actresses, models, or showgirls whose lives ended with shocking crimes. It was a warm, quiet night in Los Angeles. For once, everything was still and serene in the otherwise busy town. But this silence and peace couldn't last forever. One LA resident was soon awoken by a loud banging sound. Considering it was the middle of the night, he was confused, so he got up and headed outside to see what was going on. As he looked in the direction of the noise, he saw a young woman hit the ground. He peered into the distance and saw a man making a run for it. The man stood frozen stiff by what he had just seen. And as the woman gazed in the direction of the running man, she could only utter one word: why? Welcome to True Crime Stories. If you're new here, I'm your host, Ty Knotts, and I post new true crime documentaries every single week. So if you're interested in good old-fashioned true crime without a bunch of AI nonsense, you've come to the right place. So be sure to hit that subscribe button. It's totally free and just keeps you up to date with all my future videos. Rebecca Schaeffer moved to New York in hopes of becoming a supermodel. But fate had something else in store for her. One cover shoot for 17 magazine changed Rebecca's life, and the next thing she knew, she forgot all about modeling and was now starring in a popular comedy series called My Sister Sam. It all happened so fast that it honestly made her head spin, but Rebecca knew that she was on the path to success, and she was running headfirst into whatever the Hollywood scene had to offer. From here, things were on the up and up. Rebecca bagged various supporting roles in television films, feature films, and TV series, and she was on her way to becoming a star. With fame, though, came a lot of fans and a truckload of admirers. Anyone and everyone wanted Rebecca's autograph, or a response to one of the many fan letters that had been mailed to her. And Rebecca truly loved writing back to her fans. It was because of their love and support, combined with Rebecca's determination and hard work, that she was where she was in the first place. And she loved giving back to them, even if only in some small way. Rebecca received letters from everyone. While most of them were uplifting and put a smile on her face, well, some weren't so nice. That is sadly what happens when someone gets famous. They get attention of all kinds, and not everything is camera shutters, blinding lights, and expensive dresses on a red carpet. And Rebecca was about to find this out the hard way. There was someone out there who was obsessed with Rebecca, but she had no idea just how deep this obsession ran. No one imagined or even thought in their wildest dreams that Rebecca's stalker would take things to the next level, like visiting her workplace and finding out where she lived. But they did. On July 18, 1989, a quiet and peaceful Los Angeles neighborhood was jolted by a deafening banging sound. A neighbor decided to check things out, and as he went outside and looked in the direction from which the noise was heard, he stopped in his tracks. On the ground, by the entrance of an apartment complex, lay a woman who was clearly injured and in distress. In the distance, a man in a yellow shirt was seen making a run for it. The young woman was still alive, and she was repeatedly heard saying one word: why? The neighbor called emergency services, and within minutes, the young woman was loaded into an ambulance and taken to the Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. Her condition was getting critical by the minute. She was losing consciousness, and for the doctors, things were not looking good. Tragically, the woman would lose her life within 30 minutes of reaching the hospital due to a severe chest injury. But who was this woman anyway? Well, she was up-and-coming actress, 21-year-old Rebecca Schaeffer. And at the time of her passing, she had just secured a major role in The Godfather 3, and she was over the moon about this role. It was very likely to be her big breakout moment. But she wouldn't get to perform this role because someone had evil intentions in mind, and her whole life as a promising actress was blown to painful shreds without a moment's notice. No one could have guessed that such a bright, vibrant young actress could lose her life so young. To her family, it seemed like only yesterday that she was in diapers babbling about who knows what to her parents, Dana and Benson. Her family had been living in Eugene, Oregon, and Dana worked as a writer at Willamette University, whereas Benson was a child psychologist. Rebecca was the couple's only child, and the Schaeffers were a devout Jewish family, and they were all very close. The family eventually moved to Portland, where Rebecca went to school and eventually discovered her love of modeling, and later, acting. Belonging to a Jewish family, Rebecca initially wanted to become a rabbi, but she always had been fond of acting. Well, fate had something else in store for her, and it wasn't until she was 14 that she realized that her true calling was to become an entertainer. She caught the eye of some modeling agencies when she was in high school, and as soon as Rebecca stepped into this niche, it was as if her world finally came to life. Rebecca wanted to be a star. She was fond of modeling and acting, and she actually had begun her career with a few modeling gigs for department store catalogs and commercials, and even landed a few roles as an extra in a television film. But living in Oregon limited Rebecca from discovering her potential and bagging bigger opportunities. So in 1984, when she was 16, she decided to move to New York City. And there she worked with Elite Model Management, a modeling agency for aspiring models. After spending the summer in New York, Rebecca decided to stay and pursue her dream of becoming a model, and her parents were right behind her decision. They wanted Rebecca to be happy and to do what she wanted to do, so they let her stay in the Big Apple, spread her wings, and improve her craft. Now, Rebecca was in a vast city with tons of opportunities, but that also meant she didn't know anyone there. And to add to that, she was also strapped for cash, so she lived with a bunch of other aspiring models in a small New York apartment. And things were going as well as they could, all things considered. Even though things were tough at times, Rebecca found a huge group of friends who were all in the same boat. It turns out she loved every second of living in New York, even the bad parts of living in such a huge town. Even though it was audition after audition, shoot after shoot, and then there was the waiting game, which was honestly the hardest part, Rebecca was living a very happy life, and she couldn't wait to bag that one role that would make her a star. The only problem was, she could have never guessed that after landing that major role, her life would be stolen away from her. Moving to New York was a launch pad for Rebecca's acting career, because in late 1984, Rebecca played the role of Annie Barnes on ABC's show One Life to Live. But Rebecca wasn't serious about acting at the time, and she wanted to get her foot in the door of modeling. But that was easier said than done, because even though Rebecca was talented and beautiful, she was lacking in height. Now, Rebecca stood at 5'7" tall, but because they deemed her too short, she wasn't able to book many modeling gigs. I mean, 5'7" seems like a pretty reasonable size to me. I mean, heck, that's 3 inches taller than I am, but I guess modeling is a strange business, and she was rejected from gig after gig. Feeling let down, not getting her dream job, Rebecca made another decision, and that was to move to Japan in 1985, a little less than a year after her work on One Life to Live. She was hopeful that she would land modeling contracts in Japan, but that didn't happen either, and this was when an epiphany hit her. Rebecca enjoyed acting, and due to not getting into modeling for reasons beyond her control, Rebecca decided to leave her dream of modeling behind and focus solely on acting. Rebecca loved acting and performing. She was made for putting on a show. She had it in her blood since she was born, putting on performances and shows for her family and friends, making everyone laugh, so Rebecca had made up her mind, and she was going to move back to New York and focus on becoming an actress. This was when her career really began to pick up the pace, and it was also when people started to take notice of her. But for some of those people, they were noticing her for all the wrong reasons. Upon moving back to New York City in 1986, Rebecca did manage to land a few roles, but she was still struggling immensely. She ended up working as a waitress while she did her best to land some new roles, and it's safe to say her acting journey was quite difficult, but she never let her fears or worries get the best of her. And soon enough, it was time for that fateful photo shoot that would change her life forever. Almost as if it came completely out of nowhere, Rebecca was asked to appear on the cover of 17 magazine, which for Rebecca and other girls her age from Oregon was like landing on the cover of Vogue. It was a huge deal, and it was this very front cover that caught the eyes of television producers. After this photo shoot, producers reached out to Rebecca's agency and called her in for an audition for My Sister Sam, a hit comedy series that was super popular at the time. This phone call was like a dream for Rebecca. She was extremely excited about the opportunity. She was auditioning for the role of Patty Russell, a teenage girl who moves to San Francisco to be with her older sister after their parents pass away. Basically, Rebecca was going to play the role of Pam's younger sister, with Pam being one of the main characters in the series. Rebecca went to the audition and she gave it her best, and she was waiting for the good news for days, and finally, one day her efforts paid off. Rebecca scored Patty's role, and the rest was history. My Sister Sam was a hit, and it was ranked in the top 25 sitcoms of all time. After this series eventually ran its course, though, Rebecca was soon asked to perform in various other movies, and within a very small amount of time, she had made a huge name for herself. But the thing that most people never consider when they have dreams to be models, actors, influencers, or whatever it may be, the thing they don't consider is that, yes, you end up with tons of fans singing your praises, but you also end up with fans who want a little more from you than you can realistically offer. Dedicated fans are great. They're what keep the machine turning, and they're what keep your spirits up when you start to doubt yourself. But some fans can be a bit too dedicated. They want all of your attention no matter what. And some of them, well, they're willing to kill just to get that attention. Rebecca used to get a lot of fan mail and letters. 90% of them were very supportive and kind, but some of them were pretty unsettling. Now, this was the 1980s, so obviously there was no Instagram, Facebook, or social media sites where people could find celebrities and follow them, comment on their pictures, and do all that kind of stuff. At the time, fan mail, letters, and posters were all the rage. If you were a fan of a band, an actor or an actress, or even a reality TV celebrity, then your room would be covered with posters, merchandise, and other knickknacks. Fans would also write to their favorite actors and celebrities, and if they were lucky, maybe they'd get a reply back from them. So this was exactly what one fan did. He wrote letters to Rebecca, but they weren't threatening or anything. They genuinely looked like letters from an adoring fan. He would go on and on about how Rebecca was so talented, beautiful, and amazing, and how he watched every single one of her movies and shows. Typical fan stuff. It was a very innocent letter that screamed nothing but, "I'm a huge fan of yours." But little did Rebecca know that something else was simmering underneath this seemingly normal fan behavior. Turns out, these letters were from a young man named Robert John Bardo. Robert was the youngest of 7 children, but his life from the get-go was anything but perfect. His dad was a raging alcoholic and very abusive towards his wife and kids. Robert belonged to a pretty dysfunctional family, and he was subjected to abuse by his siblings, parents, you name it. Naturally, seeing their dad, some of the kids also turned violent from a young age. But not Robert. If anything, he was just on the receiving end of this abuse. He was constantly belittled by his siblings, and he was basically just their punching bag. This led Robert to be put in a foster home when he became unstable and threatened to harm himself after suffering the constant abuse at the hands of his own family. Sources said that Robert's family was pathological and volatile. It was a very unstable household and not nurturing at all for any one of the children. But since Robert was the youngest, he eventually became the pushover of the family. If anyone wanted to take their anger or edge off, Robert would be their target. This is why Robert grew up to be very, quote, emotionally handicapped, as one source labeled him. And he just couldn't get a grip on his pent-up frustration, which is heartbreaking to hear. Soon, the parasite of dysfunction had latched onto Robert too, and when he reached adolescence, he also became very violent and angry. A typical case of generational trauma, where a parent experienced trauma at some point, so they pass off that trauma secondhand to their children, and then their children do the same, so on and so forth. Robert was unfortunately caught in this exact same cycle that so many of us find ourselves in. Now these days, this cycle is breakable with determination and therapy. It's certainly easier said than done, but help is basically around every corner these days. But Robert didn't have that luxury. He didn't get any help for his underlying mental health issues because, well, it was the 1970s and 80s. People weren't educated about mental health and the importance of getting help as they are now. Back in the day, if someone was mentally challenged or struggling, then they were basically left to deal with it on their own more often than not. No one really tried to help them. Sure, there were doctors around who'd throw some pills at the situation, but we just didn't have the proper knowledge or education back then to know what to do with people with mental illness. It was as if being mentally ill was a contagious disease and a kick to people's reputations. They were more hush-hush about it than anything, and that's just devastating. Robert's family also had a history of these mental health issues, and soon after all this came to light, Robert was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. With so many obvious struggles in his life, it shouldn't come as a shock that he had several run-ins with the law, and he was arrested 3 times for charges relating to violence, disorderly conduct, and being publicly inappropriate, and several other offenses too. We don't know the details, but it is still chilling to know that he was just a teenager when he was out terrorizing people and threatening them. Even Robert's neighbors were terrified of him because his attitude reeked of bitterness. It also came as no surprise that Robert was institutionalized when he was 15, and after getting released, he dropped out of high school even though he was a pretty good student. When he was in school, he would ace all of his classes and was a legitimate straight A student for most of his life. Now, he worked several odd jobs at this point to make ends meet, and at one point, he even worked as a janitor as well as a cook at a Jack in the Box restaurant. Even though he was smart, Robert was still a dropout at the end of the day, so these jobs were basically all he could get. At the time, no one else would hire him. Well, around the same time, when he was working as a janitor, Robert developed a fixation with someone famous. She was a child actress and a peace activist named Samantha Smith. Samantha was only 10 years old when she wrote a letter to the newly appointed General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Yuri Andropov. And in that letter, she pinned her distaste for wars and pleaded with everyone to make peace. Her contributions to the anti-war protests of the Cold War led to her popularity, and she was given a bunch of titles, such as America's Youngest Ambassador. Her popularity led her to pursue acting as well as peace activities in Japan. She starred in a Disney Channel special titled Samantha Smith Goes to Washington, and she even starred in a television series called Lime Street. All that to say, she was quite famous. I mean, her letter to General Secretary Yuri was published in the Soviet state-run newspaper Pravda, and her peace activities were front-page news in every newspaper. It caught a lot of attention, including that of Robert Bardo, who became obsessed with her. Now, Robert was in Tucson, Arizona, and Samantha was in Maine, but Robert's obsession led him to travel to Maine in hopes of meeting Samantha, but he was unsuccessful after he was given a citation by the police. Well, undeterred by this, he resorted to writing letters to Samantha, and although we don't know what was written in the letters and if they ever reached Samantha or not, it's still disturbing to think that Robert was so fixated on a 13-year-old girl, especially considering he was now legally an adult. Well, his obsession only died when Samantha tragically did as well. On August 25th of 1985, Samantha and her dad were aboard a Beechcraft 99 aircraft when it crashed while landing, colliding into some trees. And that crash resulted in all of the passengers and crew losing their lives, including Samantha and her dad. Hearing this news, Robert was deeply saddened, but that also meant he had no one to obsess over anymore. And that was when his attention diverted to none other than Rebecca Schaeffer. Robert was 19 at the time when he started writing letters to Rebecca. And I know what you're thinking. His letters were likely creepy, disturbing, provocative, and gross. But that wasn't the case. His letters were actually very appreciative, and nothing stood out that made Rebecca feel uncomfortable. If anything, it was uplifting, and Robert only raved about her like any ordinary fan would. So Rebecca wrote him back, telling him that his letter was one of the nicest she'd ever received. But that was a mistake. What Rebecca didn't suspect was that Robert John Bardo would become obsessed with her after this reply, and things wouldn't end well. Because some people can exploit kindness, take it the wrong way, and think it's their birthright to be appreciated by the people they're a fan of. And this isn't the case at all. Truth be told, Rebecca only wrote back to be nice. In reality, she'd probably said the exact same thing to tons of her fans in the past, but Robert couldn't see this. He felt that in some way, Rebecca was interested in continuing contact with him, either to be long-term friends or even life partners. He didn't know. But he did know that he wanted Rebecca, and he wanted her now more than ever, and he was determined if he couldn't have her, no one else could either. Rebecca unknowingly caught the attention of Robert with her reply to him, and he picked things up with Rebecca right where he left off with Samantha. He would watch all of Rebecca's movies and TV shows over and over. He was essentially a super fan, which there's nothing wrong with, but the next few things might make you feel weird. This time around, Robert thought that it was a good idea to visit the place where Rebecca worked. It was a Warner Bros. Lot in Burbank, Los Angeles. Robert somehow found out where Rebecca worked, and this was around the same time when she was working on the set of My Sister Sam. Now, I don't know how Robert's thought process worked, but he literally thought he could just walk into Warner Bros. Like it was a hotel or something and ask for Rebecca, and she would magically drop everything and meet him and hang out. I don't know if Robert was truly just blind to how this job works, or if this was something that tied him with his mental illness, but clearly, whatever it was, Robert just didn't get it. Well, before Robert could even step foot inside the building, he was stopped by security. According to security, Robert had a teddy bear and flowers for Rebecca, and he just wanted to give them to her and maybe talk to her for 5 minutes. But obviously that didn't happen, because he was escorted out of the lot. He was asked to leave, and he did, thankfully. Now, Warner Bros. Had a policy that actors and actresses were not informed of such unwanted visitors, so as not to unsettle the actors or hinder their work. So Rebecca wasn't even aware that on the other side of the door, her mystery pen pal was stopped by security. Now, calling Robert Rebecca's pen pal is a stretch, because they literally exchanged letters one time. But Robert might as well have thought that the two had been talking for years. In his mind, it was Rebecca's duty as a celebrity to drop everything and meet her fan who'd come all the way from Tucson. But not getting to meet Rebecca didn't stop him from visiting that same place again. See, even though Robert didn't get to meet Rebecca the first time around as he had hoped, he was hell-bent on seeing her in person, and he was willing to do anything to make sure that would happen. So when he came back next time, he brought a weapon. Things escalated pretty quickly with Robert. After getting turned away the first time, he came back again, and this time he was armed. But fortunately, Robert was still not allowed to go in this time either, and he was asked to leave again. Thankfully, he left yet again without a fight. One thing about Robert was that he never put up a fight. If he went to meet the objects of his obsession and was stopped by security, he wouldn't try to barge in or make a scene. He would just remain calm, cool, collected, and he'd leave without an ounce of confrontation. This is really weird and unsettling at the same time, because you often hear about stalkers, and they're often very persistent, and they pull off every trick in the book to get their point across. But that wasn't the case with Robert. If anything, he was compliant with security, and maybe that was the reason why he never really got into any trouble here, nor did the security think of 19-year-old Robert as a threat. Warner Bros. Security genuinely perceived Robert as a harmless, lovesick fan who just wanted to see his favorite celebrity in the flesh just once. But the thing is, many people have been hypercritical of Warner Bros. Security, claiming they should have done something to stop this guy when he kept coming back, begging to meet Rebecca. But the thing is, I'm not sure they really knew how dangerous this guy truly was. I mean, yeah, he had a weapon, but from what I've gathered, it's not like he charged in the front door waving a knife around for the world to see. Truth be told, they probably didn't even recognize him from any other fan, and may not have even noticed that this same guy had shown up twice. He looked like just about any other fan who'd ever walked through that door. I certainly understand the frustration with security, and it would have been great if they'd done something, but they truly seem like they didn't know. It's even more scary to think that Rebecca didn't know that Robert, the same fan who wrote her that heartfelt letter, was outside her workplace with a weapon. Rebecca didn't even realize that she could have been in grave danger if she were to have crossed paths with Robert that day. But another thing Rebecca didn't know was how fast Robert was derailing. He was slowly becoming more persistent and more aggressive. And just because Rebecca didn't know anything about it, doesn't mean that Robert was any less of a danger to her. It just took one wrong tick and everything came crashing down. But before it could escalate to the events that led us here, something very unexpected happened, which you normally don't hear about in cases like this. There came a point when Robert's obsession with Rebecca also ran its course, and he just wasn't fixated on her anymore. Why? Well, that was because he'd found other targets. They always do. Now that Robert had seen the world of acting and music, he saw many women that he could grow fond of. Those women even included the likes of Madonna. Now, we don't know the full extent of Robert stalking other celebrities. I'm assuming that he tried to go where these celebrities lived, and when he wasn't able to get in, obviously because of security, well, he resorted to writing letters, watching their movies, listening to their music, and trying to make plans to meet the women again. But for Robert, this whole thing seemed to have been a rinse and repeat cycle. This guy was just a serial stalker, or at the least, he tried to be, because he wasn't successful in reaching any of these women or terrorizing them with his antics. But before long, Robert bounced back to Rebecca, and this time, the obsession reached new heights. It all began when he watched Rebecca's latest movie. Something you should know about Robert, and why he was obsessed with Rebecca, is that he was drawn to her innocent nature, and he genuinely grew infatuated with her. To be frank, Rebecca was always complimented by fellow actors, movie producers, and her mentors, saying that she had a very refreshing, innocent air about her, and that's exactly what caught Robert's attention too. But this time around, Robert's obsession would reach newer and more furious heights. Robert watched her 1989 film, Scenes from the Class Struggle in Beverly Hills. And in that movie, Rebecca played a supporting role. But when Robert reached a particular scene in which Rebecca was seen getting cozy with a fellow actor, it was as if a switch just flipped in his brain. The scene was pretty tame, but for Robert, this scene shattered the innocent image he had of Rebecca. And after this, he wasn't the same anymore. His infatuation with Rebecca took a very sour turn, and he called her extremely derogatory names. It was at this point that it was clear to see Robert had lost touch with reality entirely. He could no longer differentiate between the person and the character they play on screen, and he saw Rebecca as his own property. And now, in his eyes, she was essentially cheating on him. Well, around this same time, Rebecca moved out of her dauber home and got her own apartment in West Hollywood. She lived in a safe neighborhood surrounded by other apartment complexes and houses where a lot of other famous people lived. It was Rebecca's first time living alone, but she felt that it was safer since she lived in an apartment complex instead of a house. And no one like nosy reporters or paparazzi could come find out Rebecca's apartment number. Well, after her work on My Sister Sam, Rebecca was approached with an offer that made her see stars. She was asked to audition for the role of Mary Corleone in The Godfather 3, which was scheduled to be released in 1990. Now, The Godfather 3 was a pretty big deal for Rebecca. It was already a massive movie franchise, and the cast was star-studded. Every big name you could think of was in the Godfather movies, and now Rebecca's name was going to be on that list too. She was due to receive the script of the movie via courier in July of 1989, and she was basically bouncing off the walls to get her hands on this script. She was looking forward to it because, in her mind, if she got that role, it would be the final move to launch her into international stardom. She was expected to meet up with the director that same day when she received the script, so that they could go over all the details for her role. But that wouldn't happen, because Rebecca would never get that script, because the very day she was supposed to receive it, her career would be unexpectedly cut short. Robert was determined to find Rebecca and make her pay for what she had done to him, at least in his eyes. Cozying up next to another star in a fictional movie? In Robert's mind, this was war. Robert pulled out all the stops to find Rebecca and give her a piece of his mind. And how did he do this? Well, he paid a detective agency in Tucson to find out Rebecca's home address in West London. Let that sink in. This guy paid the agency $250, and I wish I could say that he was scammed, but unfortunately, he wasn't. And that agency managed to dig into California's DMV records, and they found Rebecca's home address and handed it over to Robert. You heard that right. It is so terrifying that sensitive and confidential information like Rebecca's home address could be made public for a mere $250. It is just insane and terrifying to think that people can get that kind of information from anywhere. Well, immediately afterward, Robert, with the help of his brother, got his hands on a firearm. He hid the firearm in a shopping bag and tucked it away either in his luggage or his jacket, and he proceeded to board a Greyhound bus from Arizona to where Rebecca lived, West Hollywood. On the fateful day of July 18, 1989, Robert reached Los Angeles and asked neighbors around the area if Rebecca lived there. I'm genuinely surprised at how people didn't find this behavior suspicious. The guy was seriously just going door to door asking for Rebecca. From this fact alone, it seemed like the information Robert was given may have only led him to the apartment complex, and it seems like the detective agency didn't know her specific room number, but soon enough, he'd found it. When Robert reached Rebecca's specific building, he rang the doorbell in the lobby, and an excited Rebecca rushed down to the lobby on the ground floor because, if you remember, she was looking forward to getting that script delivered for her role in The Godfather 3. And she also had a meeting with the director right after getting the script, so when she heard the doorbell, she assumed it must have been either the delivery or the director. But Rebecca was taken aback when she saw a random young man standing there with no script in hand. Keep in mind, Rebecca had never seen Robert's face before, so she was obviously on the defensive. According to Robert, he showed Rebecca the letter and an autograph that she'd sent him in reply. And maybe that was the point when Rebecca realized this guy was a bit of a creep. I mean, sure, he was a fan, but he managed to find out where she lived, and now he was standing in front of her home, as if he'd done nothing wrong. Well, according to Robert, Rebecca greeted him nicely, but then sternly told him not to visit her again, and bid him farewell before leaving and going back up to her apartment. And you'll be surprised to hear that Robert actually just left. If you remember, Robert never put up a fight for anything. He just left when she asked him to. This guy, he went through all that trouble to find her home address, and after a brief meeting, which I'm assuming left Rebecca feeling very unsettled, he just left. But this was nowhere near the end. Robert went to a nearby diner where he had breakfast, and then an hour later, he was standing in front of Rebecca's building again. When he rang the bell and Rebecca came back to the lobby, Robert remembered that Rebecca had a cold look on her face, and naturally so. Robert remembered Rebecca asking him why he was at her house again and telling him to hurry up as she didn't have a lot of time. This was apparently what caused Robert to lose his cool. In his words, he thought that it was a, quote, callous thing to say to a fan. This was Robert's point of no return. Heartbroken by Rebecca's lack of interest, Robert pulled the weapon from the shopping bag and fired at Rebecca at point-blank range, hitting her in the chest with one single round. This was the moment when the neighbors heard the commotion and came out to see what was going on, only to find Rebecca lying on the ground. All she could get out was, "Why?" before Robert turned around and ran off. But not before Rebecca's neighbor spotted him. That man in that yellow shirt that the neighbor saw running away from a collapsed Rebecca, that was Robert John Brando. He'd fatally attacked Rebecca, and whether he knew it or not, she tragically lost her life within 30 minutes of that attack. Rebecca, a hardworking and humble actress on the brink of her successful career, had her life taken from her, all because she refused to appease a stalker. If Robert thought that he would get away with murdering Rebecca, he was wrong. Because within one single day of Rebecca's attack and tragic passing, he was arrested in Tucson. How? Well, he was reported by several people for running aimlessly through traffic on Interstate 10, and people found him crouched over the hood of a random car, bawling his eyes out. Investigators assumed that Robert was contemplating ending his own life by running straight into oncoming traffic, but luckily he was unsuccessful. He was taken into custody, and almost instantly, he confessed to murdering 21-year-old Rebecca Schaeffer. But even though he confessed to the crime, he ended up pleading not guilty to all the charges, and now he was awaiting trial. Robert's defense decided to use his mental illness to get him out of prison. They claimed that he was not in the right state of mind when he murdered Rebecca, and because he suffered from bipolar disorder as well as schizophrenia, he wasn't aware of his actions. Now, this was the real challenge for the prosecution. They had to prove that Robert had planned it all and convinced the jury that he was an obsessed man going after a celebrity, because from the looks of it, the defense was going to go for the insanity plea, and things were looking up for Robert. He had bipolar disorder. He belonged to a dysfunctional family. All the defense had to do was sway the jury in the right direction, and boom, case won. But little did anyone know, the prosecution had some cold, hard evidence against this man. Robert was fully aware of his actions, we know this, and he intended to end Rebecca's life when he walked out of his home in Tucson, Arizona that day. He already had a firearm in his shopping bag. If Rebecca's murder was a last-minute plan, as Robert's defense claimed it was, why would he have brought this weapon with him and hidden it in a bag? Robert knew that he had to murder Rebecca for whatever reason. That's why he went through the trouble of going to a private detectives agency and paying them to find Rebecca's address. He went door to door in a West Hollywood apartment complex and asked people if Rebecca actually lived there. Rebecca did nothing that could explain why Robert went off his rocker, aside from being creeped out, which is a pretty normal reaction. Worse yet, Robert was carrying a copy of The Catcher in the Rye when he murdered Rebecca, and he dumped the book near her home on a rooftop as he fled the scene. This alone caused a lot of people to connect Robert's actions to those of Mark David Chapman, who carried the same book when he murdered John Lennon in 1980. Also, remember how Robert paid a detective agency to find Rebecca's home address? Well, it's believed this was influenced by Arthur Richard Jackson, who hired a private investigator to find an actress, Teresa Saldana's home, where he also attacked her ruthlessly. Also, he went back to Rebecca's home after having breakfast at a diner. He could have stopped right then and there if he wanted to, but he didn't. So Robert couldn't hide behind his mental illness forever. Or could he? In the end, Robert was thankfully found guilty of first-degree murder in the case of Rebecca Schaeffer, and he was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. As luck would have it, many years later, on July 27th of 2007, Robert was attacked on his way to breakfast in the maximum security unit of Mule Creek State Prison. Prison guards found 2 inmate-crafted weapons at the scene, and Robert was treated at UC Davis Medical Center. Turns out he was attacked by another second-degree murder convict who was serving an 82-year to life sentence at Mule Creek State Prison. Thankfully, Robert made a full recovery so that he would still have to face the rest of his sentence. While in prison, an interview with Robert was actually videotaped, and he went into extreme detail about how he had murdered Rebecca. And there were a lot of strange details in Rebecca's murder that sounded eerily similar to a few other cases. It seems like, in some weird way, Rebecca's murder was inspired by several other high-profile cases. It starts with the private investigator that he hired to find Rebecca's home address from the California DMV records. When the investigators heard of this detail, it was oddly familiar to an incident that happened sometime before Rebecca's murder. It was an incident that involved stalking another celebrity. See, there was an actress named Teresa Saldana. She starred in the 1990 TV series The Commish, as well as films like Raging Bull and Defiance. Teresa caught the eye of a 46-year-old drifter, Arthur Richard Jackson, who was originally from Aberdeen, Scotland. He became obsessed with her, and soon his obsession took a dark turn. He wanted to hurt Teresa for whatever sick reason. There was really no logic here, he just wanted to do it. This man traveled from Scotland all the way to the United States just to attack Teresa, and not before he found out where she lived. See, Arthur actually also hired a private investigator who was somehow able to get a hold of Teresa's mom's home phone number. Arthur then proceeded to call Teresa's mom, claiming to be a famous filmmaker's assistant, and he asked for Teresa's home address, which her mom gave to him. I mean, she had no reason to suspect Arthur. He sounded very convincing. But then, on the morning of March 15th of 1982, Arthur stood in front of Teresa's West Hollywood apartment on the second floor, and when Teresa answered the door, Arthur launched a vicious and frenzied attack on her. Teresa was seriously injured, but was saved when a delivery driver intervened, subdued Arthur, and called the police. Arthur was arrested on the spot, and Teresa was rushed to the hospital with 10 serious wounds. Her injuries were so bad that she had to stay at the hospital for 4 months. But luckily, she managed to make a full recovery, but she was never really the same after this. This led Teresa to take part in anti-stalking movements, and she became a prominent figure as an activist. Meanwhile, Arthur was jailed for 14 years for the deadly assault on Teresa, and he even made threats to target her and the delivery guy from prison, which is just terrifying on a whole new level. Luckily, he was later extradited to the United Kingdom, where he would be tried for unrelated charges. And shortly after this, he passed away from heart failure. Teresa's attack took place almost 7 years before Rebecca's attack, but it seemed like Robert took notes from Arthur, because he also got his hands on Robert's home address through a private investigator firm, sometime before his evil plan was actually put into motion. Apparently, this was a thing. It's so scary to think that private investigative firms had the means to leak personal information like that. But that wasn't the only thing Robert was inspired by. If you remember, the police also found a red paperback copy of The Catcher in the Rye on a nearby rooftop where Rebecca was found. It was believed that Robert had tossed the book near the crime scene before he made a run for it. And now, this detail also rang a bell, because another person was seen carrying that same book when he also murdered someone. His name was Mark David Chapman, and he stalked and murdered the Beatles singer John Lennon. Mark was jealous of John's lavish lifestyle and had very strong opinions on some of his songs and political stances. He stalked John for a long time before finally putting his plan into action on December 8th of 1980. He was seen loitering around John's apartment in Dakota on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, New York. The crazy thing is that Mark even interacted with John at one point. He approached John with a copy of his album and handed it over to him to sign. Witnesses claim that Mark didn't say a word to John, and a photographer even snapped a photo of the incident, John giving Mark an autograph on his album. He stuck around for some time though, and he followed John around. But a few hours later, that's when it all came crashing down. Because when John and his wife Yoko reached their apartment in Dakota and made their way towards the entrance, Mark saw his chance. He pulled out a firearm that he had on him all this time, and the surrounding people heard 5 deafening banging sounds, and John dropped to the ground, and that was that. The similarities here are uncanny. While Robert may not have casually stuck around after Rebecca's murder, you can't help but notice several similarities here. And it really leaves you wondering, was Robert's fascination and murder of Rebecca an isolated thing, or was he inspired by other killers? The way I see it, the way he was so fascinated with several other actresses, well, it really makes you wonder, was the situation with Rebecca really a one-off incident, or was he stalking various celebrities just waiting for one of them to give him an opportunity to strike, so that he could in some way reenact the crimes of his idols, Mark Chapman and Arthur Jackson? Celebrities before Rebecca Schaeffer were also victims of stalkers, and they also lost their lives very tragically and needlessly. And in the end, Rebecca's murder led to a huge change in California law, as well as US law. Stalking officially became a crime. It also led to the passing of anti-stalking laws, which were originally drafted in 1990. Moreover, the Driver's Privacy Protection Act was also enacted in 1994, preventing DMVs from providing or releasing sensitive information, like residential addresses or other things, to anyone. Furthermore, victims could obtain a 10-year restraining order from a civil judge, which was far better than the measly 4-year stay-away order that stalkers couldn't even be deterred by. A specialized Los Angeles police unit was also established, whose job was to work with celebrity attorneys and prosecutors to ensure the safety of anyone and everyone in Hollywood. To keep things rolling, any attempts by the stalker that are considered harmless, like love letters, incessantly reaching out to celebrities, and more escalated attempts of threatening and kidnapping, well, they're to be taken seriously by the police every single time. Teresa Saldana, the same stalking victim Robert took inspiration from, was also one of the many people who lobbied for the anti-stalking law and the 1994 Driver's Privacy Protection Act, which were put into effect following Rebecca's murder. Rebecca's case truly changed Hollywood forever. Suddenly, celebrities were on edge and felt like prisoners who had to constantly look after themselves because no one knew when some deranged fan or obsessive stalker would strike. Robert Bardo is still in prison serving his sentence today, but one disturbing detail came to light, and that was that he spends his time in a cell drawing pictures of celebrities. One of his drawings was of Rebecca Schaeffer. He also drew Angelina Jolie, Michael Jackson, and Taylor Swift, as well as notorious serial killers like David Berkowitz and John Wayne Gacy. This alone seems to kind of prove the hypothesis that this wasn't some one-off obsession. Robert was determined he was going to kill someone and live on in infamy, just like his idols, who were also murderers. Believe it or not, Robert's portraits are actually for sale online, priced from $25 to $100. In a prison interview, Robert addressed Rebecca and how he felt about her, and he said, "My feelings for her were uncontrollable. I was a fan of hers, and I may have carried it too far." The fact that he included that phrase, "may have," proves that even after all this time, Robert hasn't changed. And speaking of his words, after his arrest, Robert wrote a letter to his sister in Tennessee, in which he said, "I have an obsession with the unattainable." This is terrifying to decode, especially if you think about it in hindsight. For Robert, it seems like his sick and twisted obsession with Rebecca didn't die with her, as was the case with Samantha Smith. At the time of her passing, Rebecca was dating movie and television director Brad Silberling. He's known for directing movies like Casper, City of Angels, and Land of the Lost. In 2002, he went on to dedicate a film in remembrance of Rebecca, which was titled Moonlight Mile. The film follows the story of a man whose fiancée is murdered and how he battles with his grief and pain over her loss. In Rebecca's honor and to commemorate her work and success in My Sister Sam, Pam Dauber and other co-stars, Joel Brooks, David Naughton, and Jenny O'Hara, filmed a public service announcement for the Center to Prevent Handgun Violence. Rebecca Schaeffer's murder turned Hollywood upside down. And even though it led to a monumental change in the law, finally taking stalking seriously, that didn't mean that incidents like these stopped happening. In 1995, famous singer Selena was murdered by her fan club president. Later, Icelandic singer Björk was stalked and terrorized by a deranged fan who ended up taking his own life on camera in 1996. Christina Grimmie was one of the most recent cases, an innocent Christian woman who was just playing a show for fans, murdered by a stalker who also ended his own life in 2016. The scary truth is, even normal people like you and me are not safe from this fatal fixation. I mean, my wife had a stalker just last year, texting her all hours of the day, leaving creepy voicemails at 4 a.m. None of us are immune. It is seriously so alarming and scary that we don't know and can't ever truly know the people we interact with or even meet in person. If you've watched this channel for any length of time, you'll know sometimes even our closest friends aren't safe people to be around. All it takes is a moment, a decision, and an infatuation or fondness can morph into obsessive hatred and something far uglier that leaves nothing but pain in its wake. The holiday season is just around the corner. And I don't know about you, but I always seem to have a difficult time picking out gifts for, well, everyone. Most people in my life. But that's why I partnered with Uncommon Goods. Uncommon Goods is an online marketplace that specializes in handmade, original, and meaningful gifts. This isn't stuff you can just run to your local supermarket and buy. They partner with independent artists as well as small businesses to provide tons of high quality and often customizable gifts for the people you love. I shopped around on Uncommon Goods and found some really cool gifts for my wife, and I'll be honest, for myself too. We both love to cook, so the first thing I found was this amazing Himalayan salt block. You can use blocks like this to roast vegetables, spices, all sorts of stuff. It really helps bring out the flavor in whatever you're cooking. I also got these really cool grilling plates. This multi-pack comes with a variety of different woods you can choose from. And you can roast pretty much any of your favorite foods on top of these planks to infuse your meals with flavors of maple, cherry, hickory, all the best cooking woods. And finally, I found this really interesting cast iron potato baker. You just put your potatoes inside, cook them for about 45 minutes at about 400 degrees, and you end up with perfectly baked potatoes every time. Long story short, Uncommon Goods is a great place to find some amazingly unique gifts at affordable prices. So make your holiday season unforgettable with Uncommon Goods. You can use the link in the description below for 15% off your next gift purchase. Thanks to Uncommon Goods for sponsoring today's video. It's always tragic when someone with a promising career in an industry they love has that opportunity taken away from them. The case of Tammy Leppert is no exception. Tammy was a promising film star, having landed a role in an incredibly popular movie, Scarface. But Tammy's life would take an unexpected turn when she vanished without a trace. Investigators would end up following a series of bizarre and unexpected leads while searching for the missing woman. But the clues and evidence they found, well, they were strange to put it lightly. Tammy Leppert was born on the 5th of February, 1965, and from a very young age, she was destined for stardom. She had the incredible confidence needed to perform in front of an audience, as well as beauty pageant judges, without a care in the world. She'd been doing this from a very young age, but later on in life, she aspired to become a Hollywood actress. But as she stood on the edge of realizing her dreams, she suddenly disappeared without explanation. In the weeks that followed, investigators would learn of Tammy's strange behavior and anxiety before she vanished, and since her demeanor is said to have changed overnight, many people believe something happened to her that affected her so deeply that her life would never be the same again. Speaking of Tammy as a child, her mother, Linda Curtis, described her as a remarkably beautiful girl who would always wake up with a smile on her face, and who still had that same smile when she went to bed at night. It's no surprise then that Linda decided to enter Tammy into a beauty pageant while she was still young, and it soon became apparent she had a knack for it. Linda started acting as Tammy's agent, and before long, they had to keep up with an increasingly demanding schedule, as they needed to attend rehearsals for the pageants, as well as casting interviews, since Tammy also had aspirations of becoming an actress. These days, we all understand that this type of schedule with the child is, to put it mildly, unhealthy. But keep in mind, this was back in the 60s and 70s, so this information wasn't really available. With this in mind, it isn't very often that such a hectic schedule remains sustainable. And after Tammy turned 7, her parents' relationship started to fail, and they ultimately decided to get a divorce. But Linda and Tammy forged ahead. They moved out of their family home and continued chasing Tammy's dream of stardom. But mind you, Tammy was just 7 years old, so I don't know whose dream they were really chasing, Tammy's or Linda's. That's a question that's still up for debate. Being an experienced model and theater agent, Linda took on extra clients, one of whom would eventually become a part of the family. 11-year-old Wing Flanagan soon moved in with the mother and daughter duo, and in just a short while, he and Tammy became very close, with people describing the relationship as akin to being brother and sister. Wing would later describe that Tammy would always kiss him on the cheek before he left the house for the day, and at first he would feel embarrassed by the lipstick mark that it left on his cheek. But as time went by, he started to cherish the gesture, and would often leave the mark on his cheek as a badge of honor. As time went by, Tammy proved that her success as a beauty queen was no fluke, and by the time she turned 16, she'd taken part in more than 300 pageants, walking away victorious an impressive 280 times, which is no small feat. Then, in 1983, Tammy got the chance that she was looking for. She landed a role in the movie Spring Break, which was directed by Sean S. Cunningham, probably best known for directing the movie Friday the 13th, A Stranger is Watching. She played the role of a female boxer, and is also believed to have been the model for the movie's poster. Everything seemed to be moving in the right direction, and Tammy's future looked bright, to say the least. She had cemented her status as a beauty queen without any doubt, and now she'd landed a role in the movie. But then, everything changed, and to this day, no one is certain what or who caused it, but soon enough, Tammy's life would never be the same. When filming on the set of Spring Break had been completed in July of 1982, the cast and crew were invited to attend a wrap party to celebrate, and Tammy decided to attend on her own, not bringing any guests with her. It isn't known exactly what happened, but following the party, Tammy's family and friends, including Wing, stated that she seemed like a completely different person. Her demeanor had become sullen, and while she used to be talkative and bubbly, she'd now suddenly retreated into her own world. Her smile seemed to fade, and when Wing asked her what was wrong, she would quickly change the subject, at times appearing to be too scared to talk about whatever was bothering her. On other occasions, she would merely laugh the question off and try to make light of the situation. But those who knew her well could tell that something was very wrong, but Tammy remained tight-lipped. Her mother started noticing that she would sometimes sit or stand in front of the house's windows, staring outside as if she was watching the street as cars passed by. But she could never get Tammy to explain why. On one occasion, she'd been looking out the window when she called Wing over to look at something. She pointed to her neighbor's house across the street and asked him to tell her what he saw. He pointed out that they'd bought a new van, to which she replied, "Exactly." This confused him, and he asked her to elaborate. She stated that the van had mirrored windows that could hide anyone inside, and added that she was certain someone was watching her from inside that van. This must have been exceedingly hard for Linda to see, since she was used to seeing her daughter happy with a smile on her face and always ready to take on the world. Whereas now she'd seemingly shut down and refused to let anyone in, either out of fear or because she didn't want to get them involved. This was already worrying behavior, but things were only set to get worse. Tammy soon started acting paranoid, as if someone was out to get her. And soon she started refusing to eat any food that hadn't been prepared without her being present. This made it seem as though she was worried that someone might tamper with her food or drinks. But Linda couldn't imagine who would want to harm her in such a way, since Tammy was liked by everyone who knew her. Wing stated that on one occasion, the phone in the house rang and he went to answer it. But before he could do so, Tammy made sure to tell him that if the person on the other side of the line asked for her, he was to say that she wasn't home and that he didn't know where she was. She then made a startling admission to Linda. She stated that, quote, they were trying to end her life, but she wouldn't divulge any further information. Linda did her best to figure out who they were, but was never able to get Tammy to say any more since she was too afraid. This gave rise to further worrying behavior. Tammy would stay in her room for most of the day, and before she ate any meal that was served to her, she would get someone else to test it first, in case it had been tampered with. Since she never opened up to her mother or any of her friends, no one was certain whether she was afraid of something or someone that was real, or whether she was in the midst of a nervous breakdown and was afraid of things that were simply imaginary. Now, having a nervous breakdown is an easy assumption to make, especially when someone had never shown such behavior before, and since her claims seemed rather outlandish, much like a movie script, no one could be blamed for wondering whether she was suffering from a mental condition. After some time went by, Tammy eventually gave in and informed her mother that it all started when she attended the after party for spring break. She told her that while there, she'd seen something that she wasn't supposed to see, and as a result, someone was looking for her, and she was worried that when they found her, they would kill her. Try as she might, Linda couldn't get Tammy to tell her what she saw that night, and she was at a loss as to how to help her daughter, which must be a terribly helpless feeling as a parent. All she could do was try to be there for her when she needed her, and hopefully she would find the courage to eventually open up. There was hope on the horizon, though. In 1983, Tammy landed a role in the movie Scarface, which starred Al Pacino. If ever there was a chance for her to make an impression, this was it, and she seemed to grasp the opportunity with both hands. While filming was underway, she stayed in Miami, Florida with her lawyer, Walter Leibowitz, who was a friend of her family's. In the film, she played the part of a beautiful woman who distracts one of the main characters while he's waiting in a getaway car. It's been said that she made quite the impression on the film's set, and before long, she was being spoken about by some of the bigger actors. Tammy not only seemed happier, but she relished the chance that she'd been given, and it seemed that she might be on the road to recovery. That is, until the fourth day of filming, when things once again took a turn for the worse. One scene in the movie showed someone being shot, and to make it as realistic as possible, the shot included fake blood coming out of the wound with force. While this would be just another day on set for most actors and crew, Tammy, who was watching the scene being filmed, found it too unnerving to watch, and it had a profound effect on her. The casting director then contacted Walter, the family friend, and informed him that something was wrong with Tammy. He stated that she'd started crying uncontrollably while the scene was being acted out, and eventually she had to be removed from the set and taken to her trailer, where they tried in vain to calm her down. She seemed to be frightened beyond help and was trembling with anxiety, but still she wouldn't tell anyone what was going on. Walter then contacted Linda to tell her what had happened, and he suggested that Linda take Tammy to a doctor or a psychiatrist to figure out once and for all what was causing her so much distress. He feared that if she didn't get help, her career would be over. No one can handle such a large amount of pressure on their own for very long, and at this point, Tammy must have felt very alone, since she was too scared to tell anyone what or who was bothering her. Keep in mind that she was never the type of person to exaggerate a situation, and hence her fear must have been very real. Walter also suggested that if someone was really coming after Tammy, she and Linda should go immediately to the police to file a report, and hopefully get the help she needs. But this never happened, and Linda didn't know what to do next. Walter was of the opinion that Tammy wasn't delusional and that her claims were very true. He added that once he heard her talking about money laundering, he thought this may have had something to do with whatever she saw that night, but he was unable to confirm his suspicions. Following her breakdown, Tammy went back home and Linda immediately followed Walter's advice. She took her to the Brevard County Sheriff's Office, where she felt that they would give her the help she needed. But Tammy refused to divulge anything to the police, and didn't even mention that she feared for her life. Tammy may have been a lot of things throughout her life, but a rat wasn't one of them. The only solace in this situation at this point was that Tammy was home among the people she knew and loved, but this seemed to bring her very little comfort, as her behavior only continued to baffle Linda. There were times when Tammy seemed almost normal. Some days she would wake up and be as talkative and bubbly as ever, But this usually didn't last long, and soon enough she would retreat back into her own fearful world where no one else was allowed. This gave Linda and Wing hope that she was on the road to recovery and that she would eventually return to her normal self. But those hopes were soon dashed when Tammy seemed to finally snap, and she would never be the same again. In July of 1983, Wing was sitting in the living room reading a book when Tammy suddenly confronted him and accused him of looking at her. He was completely baffled and could only defend himself by saying that she was mistaken. He quickly realized something was very wrong and tried to talk to her, asking her what was going on. But this only seemed to make matters worse, as she suddenly flew into a rage, yelling at him before suddenly storming out of the house. She opened the front door and ran out onto the porch, but she suddenly found the situation all too daunting, and she changed her mind. But then, the front door of the house had blown shut behind her and had automatically locked, leaving her trapped outside. This caused her a massive amount of anxiety, and she started frantically banging on the door with her fists while screaming hysterically for someone to let her back inside. But before anyone could move to open the door for her, she'd gotten a hold of a baseball bat and started smashing the house's windows, giving us some serious insight into her state of mind. Wing eventually managed to open the door to let her back in, but as soon as he did so, Tammy threw herself at him and knocked him to the ground. She then jumped on him and started hitting him, all the while screaming at him. She was convinced that he had locked her out of the house on purpose, when the door had actually just blown shut by the wind. Linda heard the commotion of windows breaking and yelling, and she rushed to the living room to see what was going on. She couldn't believe that she was seeing Tammy attack the man who was like a brother to her, and in an effort to calm her down, she told her over and over again that she loved her. At first, Tammy barely seemed to notice, but when Linda repeatedly told her, "It's your mother, it's me, Tammy," she seemed to snap out of it and started to calm down. This was by far the worst incident regarding Tammy's behavior, and Linda knew she needed to find help, and quickly. She decided that Tammy should undergo a psychiatric evaluation, and she took her to a psychiatric hospital in Brevard County. She was placed under observation for 72 hours, during which time tests were done to check for alcohol and drugs in her system. But these came back clear, and it was determined that she was suffering from no mental issues. Staff at the hospital had no choice but to send her back home with no resolution, which would have been very worrying for Linda, since she was concerned that Tammy would have a similar episode again, and she might not be able to get her to calm down next time. Tammy was taken home, but as soon as they arrived, she turned to her mother and stated that, quote, he was still after her, and that he would likely soon end her life. She asked that when that happens, Linda make him pay for what he did. But once again, she refused to tell her mother who this person was that was after her, and it became clear no progress had been made. Tammy's fear was as real as ever, with no end in sight. The day after she returned home, Tammy called one of her friends, Rick Adams, and asked him to pick her up. She told him that she needed to go to church to pray, since she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to, and feared that she would be tracked down and killed. Her friend would later tell investigators that while they were at the church, Tammy was praying and crying inconsolably, and once they left, she told him that she loved him and that she may need to go away for a while. He then drove her home and left, perplexed by what had happened. The following day, she contacted a different friend, Keith Roberts, and asked if he could accompany her to Cocoa Beach. Linda wasn't sure whether this was a good idea, since Tammy was still acting strangely, but she allowed her to go with him, and they left the house at around 11 a.m. But still, she felt nervous. She felt that Tammy was possibly making an effort to carry on with her life as normal, since she would usually stay in her room or at the very least in the house. Little did she know that as she watched her daughter walk down the driveway and get into her friend's car, she would never see her daughter again. When questioned by investigators, Keith later reported that he and Tammy were on their way to the beach when they got into an argument. She asked if she could borrow $300 from him, then got upset when he refused to drive her to Fort Lauderdale, where she wanted to meet with a friend. He tried to reason with her, but she seemed to get more upset with every passing moment, and she eventually told him to stop the car so that she could get out. They'd only driven about 5 miles at this point, and he pulled into the Glass Bank building's parking lot to let her out of the car, with this being the final time Tammy was ever seen. No one is certain what was going through Tammy's mind at this point, but it's clear that she was looking for help, as she called her aunt's nearby shop 3 times, but had forgotten that she was on vacation, so she never received the calls. She then phoned one of her other friends, but they were also unable to answer the phone and would only realize later that Tammy had tried to contact them. What happened to Tammy after that remains a mystery. She never returned home that night and has not been seen or heard from since. Linda filed a missing person report on the 11th of July, but Tammy was nowhere to be found. It seemed to her friends and family as though she'd simply vanished into thin air. During their investigation, the police interviewed everyone close to Tammy, including the two friends who'd spent time with her in the 2 days that she was last seen. No one seemed to have a motive to want to harm her, and she hadn't mentioned any plans to anyone. It wasn't known whether she was taken against her own will or if she left by choice, and if so, where she could have gone. Most worrying of all was the fact that she was still very unstable and may have been acting irrationally out of fear. Her friends told investigators that Tammy and Linda had been arguing a lot lately, mostly about the direction of her career. They added that Tammy had stated on several occasions she couldn't wait to leave home to set out on her own. But Linda refuted these claims. She stated that her relationship with her daughter was fine, taking into account the stress that she'd been under lately. She, in turn, felt that one of Tammy's friends may be responsible for her disappearance, and specifically mentioned Keith's name as someone to be looked at. She claims that Tammy had told her that Keith was likely going to end her life, and Linda felt strongly that he was the one that she was afraid of. But after he was interviewed, investigators felt he wasn't a suspect, and no arrests were made. What doesn't make sense is, if Keith was the man she was so afraid of, why would she have called him directly and asked him to pick her up and take her to the beach? This has never been explained. What is known is that Tammy was wearing a blue floral shirt with a denim skirt and flip-flops at the time of her disappearance, and she had a gray purse with her when she was last seen. But none of these items have ever been found. Witnesses later came forward to report that they'd seen Tammy on the day that she went missing, and that she wasn't wearing any shoes, but this has never been confirmed. Now, this is the part of the video where I'll usually do a deep dive into the investigation surrounding the disappearance and what police found and what evidence they followed. But I can't this time, because police never found anything. I mean, they literally found nothing. It was as if Tammy was zapped clean off the face of the earth. The investigation ended as quickly as it had begun, because there were no trails to follow, just nothing. She was dropped off by Keith in the parking lot that day. Then she just ceased to exist. Linda added that she left the house without brushing her hair that day, which was highly out of character for her. After all, the girl was a model. But her mother is certain that she didn't run away, since she'd been planning to return to Hollywood in about 3 months, and had told her mother as she walked out the door, "Bye, Mommy. I'll see you later, okay?" These were the final words spoken by Tammy, and she was never seen again. Those words remained with Linda until she passed away years later in 1995, never having learned what happened to her daughter. At one point, it was suggested that Christopher Wilder, also known as the Beauty Queen Killer, who had claimed the lives of several women in the Florida area during the mid-'80s, was responsible for Tammy's disappearance. He was known to falsely offer women the chance of modeling for magazine covers before ending their lives, but no solid evidence was ever found to link him to Tammy, and he was never officially named as a suspect since he lost his life during a shootout with police in 1984. There was another suspected serial killer at work in the area at the time, though. John Crutchley is thought to have ended the lives of as many as 30 women between 1978 and 1985. But once again, no link between Crutchley and Tammy was ever found, and it's unlikely that he had anything to do with her disappearance. Linda stated on several occasions that she believed Tammy had inadvertently stumbled across a huge money laundering operation while at the spring break after party, and that her life had been threatened by someone involved. She felt that she was then targeted by these people, and eventually either abducted or had her life ended, since she had information that could not be allowed to be brought to the police. Whether these claims are true or not, we'll likely never know. Tammy's case is one that rings of not only tragedy, but also a promising life that changed in the span of just one night. She had the support of the people around her. She was tended to by doctors and even sat across from police officers who were willing to listen. But fear is an emotion that cannot be easily contained, and we can only imagine the terror she must have been feeling to remain silent under such dire circumstances. Still to this day, Tammy has never been found, nor has a single shred of evidence that proves she's either alive or otherwise. It's almost as if the young woman never even existed. There's just nothing at all left behind. Unfortunately, whatever the case may be, Tammy's career ended just months after it had begun, a career she'd spent her entire childhood trying to create. We can all hope that Tammy made it out of this situation safely, and that she managed to start up a new life somewhere else. In fact, following Tammy's disappearance, Cocoa Beach detective Harold Lewis received 2 telephone calls from an anonymous woman, claiming that she had proof Tammy was still alive. In the first call, the woman said that Tammy would make contact when the time was right. During the second call, she said that Tammy was doing what she always wanted, going to school to become a nurse. Proof of these claims was never provided to the police, and it's largely believed that these calls were a hoax. But it really makes you wonder. Jasmine Fiore was a budding model and actress who got her start modeling body paint and swimsuits. At just 28 years old, she'd made quite a name for herself, appearing in shows all around the Las Vegas area. And she even had a brief stint on a VH1 reality TV show. But in 2009, Jasmine's career met a sudden and tragic end when she disappeared on the evening of August 14th. Within hours of her disappearance, investigators found her remains stuffed inside of a suitcase and abandoned inside of a dumpster. The state of her body was humiliating, to say the least. In fact, the perpetrator had been so brutal that Jasmine could only be identified by the serial numbers on her breast implants. But who could have done something like this? Well, detectives have a very clear idea of who the perpetrator was, and they even pressed charges against him. But for a shocking and rather unexpected reason, the man was never arrested, even though the case would go on to change the face of reality TV forever. It was a little over 20 years ago when modern reality TV first burst onto the scene, and many credit the genre's success to shows like CBS's Survivor, which first aired in 2000. After Survivor, which saw a successful launch, series like American Idol, The Bachelor, and The Osbournes weren't too far behind. By 2005, VH1 had really begun to cash in on the new craze of reality television, and soon enough, they launched the series Megan Wants a Millionaire. Despite the show's incredible success, though, it only managed to air for a single season before it was canceled, and it's all because of the tragic loss of Jasmine Fiore. Jasmine had a somewhat difficult time growing up because her parents separated when she was just 8 years old. This meant that her mother was forced to raise young Jasmine all on her own, living in Bonnie Doon, California. We all know how expensive it can be to live in California, so it goes without saying that the two likely struggled quite a bit. As Jasmine grew a bit older, she found that she had a love for playing football. Regardless of how inclusive the sport is these days, this was a bit unusual for a girl of Jasmine's size and stature to play such a demanding sport at that time in history. But Jasmine wasn't one to shy away from pushing boundaries. As she entered her teenage years, Jasmine found a job at a local grocery store, but all the while, she wanted to pursue her dreams of becoming a model. As Jasmine became of legal age, she began applying for modeling jobs and managed to land a few work opportunities pretty quickly. She first became a swimsuit model, and soon after this, she found work as a body paint model, working for various people at parties and entertainment gatherings. Jasmine was such a big hit with her clients that she even landed several shows at some of Las Vegas's biggest casinos. For Jasmine, everything was going perfectly according to her plan, and she was truly living her dream. She appeared on various commercials for adult services, such as adult phone lines and the like, and things were really looking up for her in terms of her career. But Jasmine knew that her lifestyle wouldn't last forever. Being a pretty smart worker, she began making arrangements for where life would take her when her job as a beauty worker eventually came to an end. So she went to school and got a real estate license, and had made arrangements to open her own gym and personal training center. Jasmine had encountered various love interests over the years, and she eventually caught the attention of Robert Hasman, a man that she truly loved and admitted that she wanted to settle down with. Unfortunately, their relationship didn't really last, and they eventually went their separate ways. And before long, she found herself in the arms of a man named Travis, and the two got engaged in 2006, but they too broke off their relationship. This brings us to 2009, when Jasmine met a fellow real estate expert by the name of Ryan Jenkins. Ryan was a real estate investor who owned properties all around the Las Vegas area, but he wasn't a big shot just yet. He was more of a small-time investor who was still looking to find his place in the business and hadn't quite made it yet. With this in mind, Ryan did his best to keep his options open, and one of his options was to appear in reality TV shows on VH1. Ryan had applied for a new series known as Megan Wants a Millionaire back in late 2008 or early 2009. Ryan was over the moon when he'd been accepted onto this show, but his stint with the series didn't last very long, and he was eliminated in one of the earlier episodes. But for Ryan, this didn't matter too terribly much. That's because just days after he was eliminated from the series, he met the woman of his dreams, Jasmine Fiore. 2 days after this, the two were married. This may sound completely crazy to marry someone that you've only known for 2 days, and don't get me wrong, it kind of is, but the two claim that they have genuinely been in love with one another. According to Jasmine's friends and family, at this point Jasmine was truly, genuinely happy when she was with Ryan. Jasmine was known for being a very vibrant and energetic woman, and her relationship with Ryan only further amplified these qualities. Regardless of them meeting at a casino and having a spur-of-the-moment wedding, their love was very much real. But as you might expect, things weren't always perfect. Within months of their wedding, Jasmine was forced to call the police after her husband revealed a side of himself that she never knew existed. In June of 2009, just 3 months after Jasmine and Ryan were married, it's rumored that Jasmine had been stepping out of her marriage behind her husband's back. Jasmine had been speaking with her former fiancé, Travis, and the two had met up at what appears to have been some sort of party. At this event, Jasmine and Travis kissed, and this caused Ryan to flip out, and understandably so. But what isn't quite so understandable is Ryan's reaction to learning about this. Now, I don't know if Ryan walked in on the two or if someone told him what had happened, but Ryan sprung into action right away, and he and Jasmine got into a very heated argument. Travis admitted to what had taken place, and soon after, Ryan punched Jasmine and caused her to fall into a nearby pool. The police were called and charges were immediately filed against him. Ryan was then set to appear at trial in December of 2009, but the two reconciled soon after all this unfolded, and before long they were back on the same page again, but their marriage would never be the same after this. Lisa, Jasmine's mother, claims that Jasmine and Ryan fought constantly. The main reason for their argument was that Ryan claims that Jasmine was never willing to let go of her former boyfriends, and for all intents and purposes, this seems to have been true. Ryan felt that if they'd broken up, that should be the end of it, but Jasmine didn't feel that way. Needless to say, Ryan was a very jealous man, but strangely, some of Ryan's jealousy and some of his fears seem to have been somewhat justified. According to Ryan's father, Jasmine had been sneaking around behind his back for months. His father claims that Ryan had told him about multiple occasions in which Jasmine would leave for multiple days at a time and never tell Ryan that she was leaving, nor tell him where she had been for all this time. Now, what we don't know is whether or not this all came about after the two had the altercation at the party, or if this was taking place when the two were supposedly on good terms. If this all happened right after they separated after the party, then I totally get it. Jasmine needed space, and the last person she wanted to be with was Ryan. But if this was all going on while the two were on good terms and happily married, then you have to admit Ryan wasn't being too unreasonable by wanting to know why his wife had been missing for days at a time. Worse yet, according to Ryan, when she would return, she would repeatedly lie about where she had been, but Ryan had never explained how he knew she was lying. To make things even more confusing, Jasmine reportedly told her mother that the two had annulled their marriage in May of 2009, just 2 months after getting married. But after multiple searches of public records, there's no proof that this statement was true. By all means, the two appear to have been married when all of this was going down. This all brings us to August 14th of 2009, the night that the lives of Jasmine and Ryan would change forever, and the same night that Jasmine's final hours were captured on CCTV, and the night that would alter the course of reality television for the rest of history. It was August 14th, 2009, when Jasmine and Ryan made plans to stay at the L'Auberge Hotel in San Diego. The two were scheduled to attend a poker tournament, which was some type of charity fundraiser to raise money for the Karma Foundation. CCTV footage from this evening was viewed by investigators who say that the two were seen having a great time together. Both Ryan and Jasmine were seen in the footage laughing and smiling throughout the evening. The couple left the hotel at around 2:30 a.m. on the morning of the 14th, being spotted again at the Ivy Hotel, which was a nightclub in downtown San Diego. This nightclub was the final time the two were seen together, and by 4:30 a.m., Ryan had returned to their hotel room alone, and he would check out of the hotel by himself at 9 a.m. that morning. Jasmine was never seen again. It hasn't been reported whether or not she was spotted on CCTV at the nightclub, but whatever took place at that nightclub, things don't appear to have ended well for the couple. The following day, August 15th, police announced that they located a body in an alleyway in Buena Park, California. The person had met a very, very terrible end, and detectives say that all of their teeth had been removed, as had all of their fingers, making identification incredibly difficult. Whoever had placed this body here, they didn't want this person to ever be identified. The only thing police were able to determine was that the remains were female, and they'd been crushed inside of a suitcase that was far too small. Later that day, Ryan reported his wife missing. He told police that he had last seen Jasmine around 8:30 p.m. on August 14th at their home in Los Angeles. He said that the two had attended the aforementioned charity poker tournament, visited some bars, then they'd returned home, where Jasmine dropped him off and headed out to run some errands. After this, he never saw her again. What's never been explained is why Ryan thought this disappearance, out of all the other times Jasmine had up and vanished, was suspicious. If you remember, Jasmine was known for disappearing for days at a time, but in this particular instance, he reported his wife missing less than 24 hours after she had vanished. This has never been fully explained, but investigators had reason to believe that there was much more to Ryan than meets the eye. By the following day, Ryan had spent some time at the couple's home packing up some clothing and travel items. He was seen leaving their penthouse on August 16th at around 9 a.m. He then headed straight to Nevada to pick up his boat, but this wasn't the story that he shared with police when they reached out to him later that same day. He told them that he'd been in Utah and was heading to Canada to resolve some immigration issues. Around this same time, investigators had made some progress on the body that had been discovered in the dumpster. Despite the fact that the perpetrator had gone to such great lengths to conceal the identity of this person, the remains were identified just days later on August 18th. As the coroner was examining the body, he noticed that the woman's breasts appeared to have been altered, and he believed she may have purchased implants at some point, and this assumption was correct. During an analysis, the coroner removed the implants and was able to read the serial number that had been printed on them. The serial number tied them directly to Jasmine Fiore. The coroner was able to determine that Jasmine had lost her life within just a few hours of her body being found. But things got much worse from here. Police were soon alerted that a white Mercedes had been found abandoned in a parking lot in West Hollywood. This discovery was made less than a mile from the home that Jasmine and Ryan shared in Los Angeles. When the car was searched, it was found that it too belonged to Jasmine. But what made this discovery so disturbing is that the inside of the car was covered in a significant amount of evidence. Red stains were found everywhere in the car, and there were even signs that Jasmine's hair had been pulled out. Police then reclassified the case, officially labeling it as a homicide investigation. At this point, police wanted to speak with Ryan about his whereabouts around the time that Jasmine had vanished, but he was nowhere to be found. The following day, on the 19th of August, Ryan called his father from Vancouver, proving that he did eventually make it to Canada as he had told investigators he would. It was during this phone call that Ryan's father informed him that police were looking to speak with him, and that they'd found Jasmine's body, and that they had reason to believe she'd been the victim of a homicide. At this point, police were actively searching for Ryan. For one reason or another, they firmly believed he was behind the crime, and a manhunt soon followed. Before long, investigators received a tip that Ryan's black BMW SUV had been spotted heading towards the US-Canada border while towing a boat. Police later found the vehicle at a marina in Washington. The vehicle was empty, and the trailer that it was towing was also empty, proving the boat was out somewhere on the water. The vehicle's engine was still warm though, so Ryan couldn't have gone too far. It needs to be mentioned that at this point, Ryan wasn't considered guilty, he was merely considered a person of interest that police desperately wanted to speak to. Police were so interested in getting in touch with him that the US Coast Guard and the Customs and Border Protection Agency announced that they were sending out multiple boats to search for him. It wouldn't be until August 19th that a credible sighting of Ryan finally came in. A witness had spotted someone who resembled Ryan piloting a boat near Point Roberts in Washington, where Ryan's stepmother was known to have lived. No sooner than this report came in, police announced that they had reason to believe he had crossed the border back into Canada sometime between the 19th and the 20th. This was the final straw for investigators. They knew that Ryan had been informed that police were looking for him, so to them, this was proof that he was evading capture. This prompted them to escalate their search for him, labeling him as their prime suspect and officially charging him with homicide. It was August 20th when Ryan arrived at the Thunderbird Motel in British Columbia, Canada. He arrived with a young woman who the motel worker described as attractive, young, and very calm. The two paid for 3 nights at the hotel, and the manager didn't find them even the least bit suspicious. When police investigated the identity of the woman that Ryan was seen with, they quickly realized that it was his half-sister, Elena. The motel manager noted that he'd spotted Ryan walking out front of his room on August 21st, looking extremely exhausted. He said that he looked so disheveled that even though he was aware of the manhunt for Ryan Jenkins, he didn't recognize this as being the same person. By 11:30 a.m. on August 23rd, the manager noticed that Ryan had never checked out of his room, which had been booked under Elena's name. The manager then asked his nephew to go check in on him and make sure that he had left. But that's when he walked in on yet another crime scene. When the nephew opened the door to the room, he found Ryan's body hanging from a clothes rack by a belt. He had taken his own life. A note was never found at the scene of the crime, but investigators would later find one on Ryan's computer, dated to August 20th. The contents of this letter have never been made public, and unfortunately, this means that Jasmine's case, to this day, has never been solved. But this is far from the end of the story. Police very firmly believe that Ryan was the one who took Jasmine's life. In fact, they're pretty much certain that this is true. They have no other people of interest, and it's pretty clear to see that Ryan was struggling with some pretty serious guilt in the final days and hours of his life. After Ryan lost his life, police began to look more closely into his past, and VH1 did the same thing. VH1 being the company that invited him to appear on Megan Wants a Millionaire. According to VH1, they always conduct a background check on every star that appears on one of their reality TV shows. They claim that Ryan's background check came back perfectly clear. But a subsequent check revealed some interesting information. As it would turn out, back in 2007, Ryan had been investigated for assaulting a woman in Calgary. The production company behind Megan Wants to Be a Millionaire reiterated that he would never have been allowed onto the show if they'd been aware of this. VH1 explained that they employ a third-party private investigative firm to conduct all of their background checks. But these checks are limited to crimes that occurred within US borders, and Calgary is obviously located in Canada. So the information of this crime never made it to VH1. But what makes things even more interesting is that this third-party company, Collective Intelligence, announced that they hadn't actually been the ones to conduct the background check. Since Ryan was originally from Canada, they had outsourced the background check to another company known as Straight Line International. In the wake of the allegations against Ryan, Collective Intelligence sued Straight Line International for breach of contract, claiming that the company was fully aware of Ryan's violent history, but never reported the history to Collective Intelligence or VH1. Collective Intelligence would eventually lose trust with its primary clients, Viacom, NBC, and ABC, and Straight Line was forced to pay Collective Intelligence over $800,000 in damages. But things are still about to get even crazier, if you could even imagine. VH1 had not only hired Jenkins to be a part of the first season of Megan Wants a Millionaire. In fact, after he'd been eliminated from the show, they hired him to appear in season 3 of I Love Money, yet another reality TV series. Now, I've never seen this show, but the Wikipedia article about the series says that the show involved contestants competing in various physical and mental challenges, with the hope of winning a $250,000 grand prize. As it would turn out, Ryan Jenkins actually won the third season of the show. Ryan reportedly called Jasmine every day while he was filming the show, promising her he was going to do everything he could to win the money, so that the two could live the life they had always dreamed of. But it was also reported that throughout the duration of him filming the show, his calls to Jasmine grew progressively more and more aggressive with each passing day, and it became clear that he was growing suspicious of Jasmine while he was gone, and feared that she may have been cheating on him. And upon his return from filming, if the rumors about her involvement with her ex-boyfriend are true, he may have been right, and this may have been his motive for ending Jasmine's life. In the aftermath of this revelation, VH1 made the decision to pull the plug on the third season of I Love Money. Not one episode of this season has ever aired, and the production company, 51 Minds, was forced to settle with VH1 for over $12 million in losses from their inability to air the show. This was a pretty serious blow for the company, and it was a massive blow for reality television as a whole, and could have easily ruined the entire genre. See, when you watch a typical fictional television show, you likely don't think too terribly much about the actors, because they're not portraying themselves on screen. They're portraying a character that was created and written for them. But when it comes to reality TV, part of what makes it so captivating is that you're watching the actual person say and do things that they would likely actually say and do in real life. It may be amped up, but it's not fictional. But the thing with reality TV is that even when watching these stars on the big screen, you still have no idea who they are as a person, and that's a scary thought. It's the same feeling that comes along with watching famous YouTubers or social media stars. You only see what they or their publicity team wants you to see. For Ryan Jenkins, VH1 only wanted you to see the entertaining side of him. For the most part, these companies couldn't care less who these people are behind the scenes, and Ryan was no exception. If I'm being honest, I have a pretty good feeling that the only reason VH1 was even upset about all this was because it nearly lost them $12 million on that third season of I Love Money. And a scandal like this could have easily ruined their entire reality TV catalog. When speaking with Mark Cronin, the co-founder of 51 Minds, the main production company behind many of VH1's most popular reality TV shows, he explains that the loss of Jasmine Fiore has cast a shadow on the reality TV genre as a whole. He said that the crimes of Ryan Jenkins have given him new perspective when he's selecting contestants for future reality TV shows, saying that he trusts his gut a lot more these days, suggesting that he had a gut feeling that something wasn't right about Ryan, but chose to bring him on the show anyway. Further proving my point that, for the most part, these companies don't care about these people or who they really are as a person. Another producer spoke up and said that he would rather have a gut feeling about someone, exclude them from a show and be wrong about them, than end up with another situation like Ryan Jenkins. The producer for another reality TV series, Big Brother, has even stated that these days, many studios who conduct background checks no longer even take into account their budget. They want the best, most thorough background check they can find, with no regards to cost. And I just hope that this is true. In the end, Ryan Jenkins was never able to be held accountable for his alleged crimes. But if there's anything good that's come out of this case, it's that the entirety of reality TV seems to be a much safer place now, even if only to protect the bottom lines of these faceless corporations. But it should never have taken the loss of someone's life for these studios to provide their actors with a safe work environment. And that much should never be forgotten. A stolen Toyota Tacoma speeds down the highways of San Bernardino, California. Police are in hot pursuit. Engines are screaming as the smell of red-hot exhaust fills the air, and the sounds of sirens echo through the neighboring streets, disturbing the silence of a breezy spring afternoon. 60 miles. That's how long this chase lasted. An incredible 60 miles. The police were riding the red lines of their vehicles, trying to apprehend a suspected murderer and thief. When Chris Spots was finally forced to pull over his vehicle, he knew that the jig was up, but he wasn't going to give in. As the police surrounded his vehicle, weapons were drawn, hoping that Chris would see the light and turn himself in. a loud pop rang out from the front seat of the Tacoma. The police officers knew that their chances of taking Chris in for questioning were gone. All they wanted to do was question him about the disappearance of a local actress, Adea Shabani. But how could a seemingly ordinary spring afternoon have turned into all this? Welcome to True Crime Stories. I'm your host, Ty Knotts, and I post new true crime documentaries every single week. So if you're interested in simple, classic true crime, you've come to the right place, because that's pretty much all we do here. So be sure to subscribe. It's completely free and it just keeps you up to date with my future videos. Adea Shabani dreamt of becoming a star ever since she was a little girl. Something about being a star in Hollywood always stood out to Adea, and she wanted to make it big. Born in 1992, Adea was defined as a warm and kind young woman who had a vibrant personality. One of Adea's neighbors, Kiersey Newman, defined her as a delightful and spunky young woman. They would frequently meet in their apartment laundry room, and Adea, being the chatterbox that she was, would always give Kiersey laundry tips of all things. It seems pretty clear Adea wasn't a person to shy away from offering her opinion on things. But despite being in her 20s, Adea's bedroom walls looked a bit more like a teenager's bedroom. They were covered inch by inch in movie star posters, specifically Leonardo DiCaprio. It was Adea's dream to work alongside him in a movie, and whenever she looked at these posters, she was reminded of that dream and helped push her along towards her goal. After graduating with her business administration degree, Adea moved to Dubai, where she worked at a jewelry store. See, Adea had plans to pursue the Hollywood dream, but it was easier said than done. It took Adea 2 years before she finally made the leap and moved to Hollywood. She lived in a small apartment by herself in 2016, and even though the place was initially very foreign to her, she made it her home by decorating the apartment with fresh flower vases and, of course, lots of posters. During the same year, Adea knew that the first step to becoming a star was to enroll in acting school, so she enrolled in Stella Adler Academy of Acting, which is a very prestigious and well-known school for acting. Adea was a very serious student. She attended all of her classes and didn't miss any of her lessons unless it was an emergency. But outside of acting, Adea was also a very frequent social media user, which is pretty essential if you're trying to get your name out there these days. She loved posting random updates on social media, and she wasn't an influencer or anything, but she just wanted to share what she was doing with everyone, and was also a way for her family and friends back home to be able to keep up with what she was doing and make sure she was doing all right. A friend of Adea's, named Christian Name from Stella Adler, remembered her for being a very serious student. He knew that Adea wanted to finish school and be well prepared for her budding career ahead. She was not one to just up and leave in the middle of a program. Christian defined Adea as very bubbly, funny, energetic, and a great friend. Adea landed a few small-time roles, and these helped to keep her motivated while she continued looking for other, bigger opportunities. Well, it seemed like Adea was loving her time at Stella Adler's Studio of Acting. But this was also the very place where Adea met someone very significant, and his name was Chris Spots. Chris, originally from Colorado, was also a student at the acting school, and he was a 2009 psychology graduate from the University of Northern Colorado. He was also new to acting, and Chris starred in a short film and a couple of documentaries. Adea and Chris met in class one day, and they quickly hit it off. But Chris kept their relationship on the down low, and even Adea's friends, acquaintances, and teachers didn't know that she was dating anyone. There may have been a reason for that. It turned out that Chris was already engaged to a woman named Mary Elmalak. Surprisingly, Adea knew about Mary and Chris, but we don't know if it was true the other way around. Even though Adea didn't mind Chris's fiancé, the couple would break up and get back together again over and over. And according to some of Adea's close friends who knew about the seriousness of her relationship with Chris, it was found out that Chris actually proposed to Adea, so now Chris had 2 fiancés. At the time of the case, Adea was apparently in the midst of wedding planning. But one day on February 26th of 2018, this wedding would unexpectedly get called off. That's because Adea didn't come to school to attend her classes. And sadly, she would never come again. It was February 26th, a Monday morning, when Adea had a really important acting class. Apparently, in this class, the students were getting assigned roles of some sort, and Adea was really excited about bagging a big role that could be her debut. But Adea didn't show up for this class. Immediately, her friends thought that this was strange, because this was unlike Adea. If you remember, she didn't skip classes, and she was a responsible woman who'd never just ditch an important class for a day of fun. Her friends thought that maybe she was sick or something. But Adea wasn't active on social media either, and to make matters worse, she wasn't answering any of her friends' calls. Adea was glued to her phone at all times, and she updated her friends and family about everything, from the smallest detail to the biggest news. But Adea's social media was hauntingly silent. Her friends only knew that she'd been to a coffee shop on Friday, February 23rd, and other than that, they knew nothing about her whereabouts. So they wasted no time and immediately got the detectives involved. The investigators went straight to Adea's apartment, and as they gathered around the front door and twisted the knob, it just opened. The door was unlocked, and alarm bells were already going off in the officers' minds. They were expecting the worst, but as they walked in, they noticed nothing out of the ordinary. The place wasn't a mess, it wasn't ransacked or in disarray, so this relieved the detectives just a bit. The police looked around the apartment, and that's when they noticed something. Adea's laptop was still powered on, and according to the detectives, it looked like she just stepped out for a bit to run an errand and she never came back. Well, the next best option for investigators was to track Adea's movements, so they got their hands on the apartment CCTV footage, and in the elevator, on February 23rd, a little before 1 p.m., the detective spotted Adea. She was wearing casual clothes, but she had 2 suitcases with her. The police also saw someone with her, and it was clear that it was a man, but since he was wearing a baseball hat, the detectives couldn't really tell who he was. But that didn't mean that Adea's friends didn't know him. Turns out that this was none other than Chris Spots, Adea's on and off again boyfriend turned fiance. Suspiciously, Adea's phone activity showed that it was turned off shortly after she left her apartment with Chris. Well, now the investigators knew that Chris was possibly the last person to see or be with Adea, so they had to talk to him and find out more about Adea and where she was. When the detectives talked to Chris, he was cooperative with them. He admitted that he did pick up Adea on Friday, and when asked why, Chris proceeded to tell the police that he and Adea were going to Northern California to his father's house for a weekend getaway. But they never reached their destination, because during the ride, Chris and Adea got into a heated argument, and get this, he kicked Adea out of the car and drove off. Chris fought with Adea, his own fiancée, and kicked her out of his car 25 miles from Santa Clarita. Getting into a fight, that's whatever. Things get intense, it happens. But no fight could be bigger than Adea's safety. To add to the oddness, Chris didn't even bother to call or text Adea afterward. He didn't even care to check up on Adea to see whether she got somewhere safe or not after abandoning her on the side of the road. He just kicked her out, and that was the end of their story. But if you thought that Chris's behavior was suspicious now, well, don't worry, because you're not alone. The detectives thought that this was weird too, and when they found out about Chris's other fiancée, Mary, and the messy love triangle affair mess of a relationship that Adea, Chris, and Mary were in, they knew that Chris was not being truthful, and that he definitely was hiding something. As if Chris couldn't get any more suspicious in the police's eyes, on March 1st, he packed his bags and took off with Mary in his Toyota Tacoma for Colorado, where Chris's mom lived with her husband. The investigators were blindsided by Chris's actions, but they also knew that they had to catch this guy. But the detectives lacked the most crucial thing, and that was evidence. The police couldn't just go ahead and arrest Chris on the grounds of suspicion alone. They needed something rock solid that could explain Chris's involvement in Adea's disappearance, or whatever had happened to her. With this newfound revelation that Chris, by all accounts, appeared to be a man on the run, well, police were hot on his trail. When Adea's parents were made aware of their daughter's inexplicable disappearance, it was an earth-shattering moment for them. They were horrified and worried for their daughter. They first got that weird feeling that something was wrong when Adea hadn't called them since February 23rd. And now, to know that she'd gone missing, Adea's parents couldn't just sit and wait around thousands of kilometers away. So Adea's mom booked the first flight to Los Angeles, and she walked from one place to another with missing person flyers in hand. She was so worried for her daughter, and she just wanted to find her safe and sound. Adea's mom was also accompanied by volunteers, and they helped put out flyers everywhere, and there were even ground searches, but they all ended in vain with no clues. Adea's mom even announced a $25,000 reward for any information on Adea, her whereabouts, or any developments in the case. The police, along with volunteers, searched the wooded areas of California too, but they couldn't find anything. It was as if Adea had just been swallowed up by the earth without a trace. The detectives also checked Adea's phone in the meantime for any alarming messages or calls, and they did find something, and it showed that Chris and Adea's relationship was holding on to its last threads. See, Chris and Adea were on and off because they constantly argued with one another. Even though Adea knew about Chris's fiancée, Mary, and was okay with that arrangement in the beginning, it didn't take a genius to realize that this love triangle or affair, or whatever you want to call it, was causing a major rift in Chris and Adea's relationship. They would fight, break up, get back together, and there were multiple instances where Chris stole Adea's phone. Whether it was after a heated argument or something else, Adea would wake up to find her phone gone. Whenever she tracked it on her laptop, it was always with Chris. A friend of Adea's also came forward and said that one fight between her and Chris on Valentine's Day got really heated, and he even tried to suffocate Adea to the point where she lost consciousness. But here's the thing, Adea apparently didn't remember any of it. Now, we don't know how or why she doesn't remember, but we know that she woke up the next day and once again found that her phone was missing. When she tracked it, naturally it was with Chris. When she later learned about how Chris had gotten physical with her, Chris claimed that this never happened, and that Adea had actually lost consciousness at the restaurant where they'd been celebrating Valentine's Day. I'm assuming he must have blamed her loss of consciousness on getting blackout drunk or something, but this was never really explained very well. But with all of this new information now available, the investigators were extremely suspicious of Chris. His bizarre story of going to Northern California, kicking Adea out of his car following an argument, and now him being in Colorado with his fiancée, just didn't sit right with the police. It also didn't help matters that the detectives were unable to corroborate Chris's version of events, since the only alibi he had was Adea, and now she was missing. Well, as the police dug further into Chris's background, they found yet another bizarre thing. Remember the Toyota Tacoma that Chris drove? The same truck that he took to Colorado? Well, it was a stolen vehicle. Now, don't ask me how Chris got his hands on it because we really don't know, but this was enough reason for the detectives to put an alert out for his car on March 1st, and hopefully arrest Chris. Police departments from all over the states were alerted about this stolen vehicle, and now they just had to wait for the truck to make its appearance. Mainly, the detectives wanted to search Chris's car for any evidence, but this was as good of any place to start. Well, a little after 3 weeks, on March 22nd, that same Toyota Tacoma was spotted by a police patrol car in San Bernardino, California. The detectives tailed the car, and sure enough, Chris was driving it. But there was also another thing. There was another passenger in the car. We don't know who it was because the investigators haven't officially disclosed any information about that passenger, but they had finally found their man. As the detectives pursued the vehicle, they demanded that Chris pull over. But did he do that? Well, obviously not. He floored it and did his best to get away from the officers. The situation quickly devolved into what can only be described as a scene from an action movie. A dangerous car chase ensued, and this was basically irrefutable proof that Chris was up to something. The tense and dramatic car chase carried on for about 60 miles before the detectives finally caught up with Chris in Corona, California. After finally getting him onto the side of the road, the investigators immediately got out and tried to get Chris out of the truck before he made a run for it again. But Chris had one last trick up his sleeve that would forever change the trajectory of this devastating case. In a movement that was so quick that no one even registered what was going on, Chris pulled out a firearm from somewhere in his truck, and before detectives could get him and handcuff him, Chris fired a single round, and he ended his own life right then and there. If he had any information on Adea's disappearance or had anything to do with what happened to Adea, sadly, the police and Adea's worry-struck family would never know, because with one swift move, Chris was gone. Chris's single detrimental action completely changed the course of this investigation. The detectives were left horrified. They didn't even know why Chris escalated the situation and acted like that, as they didn't even have any charges to place against him yet that could warrant such an intense reaction. At this point, they were just trying to talk to him to see if he had any information about Adea's whereabouts. Now, naturally, we know that the police likely suspected him of murder, but no charges had even been filed, other than the car being stolen. Police didn't really even have that much evidence against him at this point. This is all just so confusing. Why was he trying to run away? And why didn't he just surrender? Everyone had so many questions, but Chris's actions led to one discovery, and it was harrowing to say the least. Even though Chris, the last person to be with Adea, was now gone, his phone left a trail of clues for the police. Thanks to Chris's cell phone activity and car movements, the detectives were able to narrow down an area where they could continue their search for Adea. It was a remote area tucked away in the uplands of the Sierra Nevada mountains. When I say this place is remote, I mean it. The only thing that frequented this area was wildlife. But why were the police so interested in this area? Well, it was because they'd managed to find a shallow grave, and I think you can tell where this is going. When the detectives reached this area on March 27th, just 5 days after Chris took the coward's way out, the ground was dug up and the investigators instantly knew what they were looking at. It was a woman's body, but the detectives were unable to identify the body just by the looks of it. There were identification marks on the body in the form of tattoos, but still, police had to confirm their suspicions. The very next day, through dental records and tattoos, the woman's body was identified as that of 25-year-old Adea Shabani. Her cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. It was a devastating and tragic revelation for Adea's family. All this time, they were hoping that maybe Adea was still out there alive, but within a month of her disappearance, her body was discovered, and what hurts Adea's loved ones the most is that they don't even know what happened to her, who did this to her, or how it escalated so badly. They know that Chris was most likely behind the murder, but they'll never get answers because, just like Adea, Chris is now gone. Adea's passing was ruled a homicide, but the police couldn't figure out what happened beforehand that led to her tragic and untimely end. Well, there was one thing that stood out to the detectives, and this made them even more suspicious of Chris because he flat out lied to the police. See, a close friend of Adea's came forward and said that Adea told her that she'd be going with Chris to attend his uncle's funeral that same weekend of February 23rd. Apparently, Chris's uncle, who lived in Sacramento, passed away from a heart attack. But after the events unfolded and Adea's body was discovered, the investigators questioned Chris's biological father, and he was dumbfounded by the information that the detectives were telling him. According to Chris's dad, his brother didn't pass away, and he didn't suffer a heart attack. He was alive and well. His dad also went on to tell the police that Chris reached home at around 7 p.m. on February 23rd and he was alone. Adea wasn't with him. Chris's behavior was also perfectly normal. He was all smiles and didn't look nervous or frightened. But later that night, he got into an argument with his dad about abandoning him and the rest of the family, and he left in the middle of the night to stay at a hotel. It seems like this guy kind of has a recurring theme to just start yelling at people and dip and run. But anyway, this detail got the detectives thinking. Was this some sort of cover-up that Chris came up with? Did he have intentions of harming Adea all along? Was this trip to Northern California an excuse to do the unthinkable to Adea? The investigators assumed that during the trip, Adea and Chris did get into an argument, but it escalated really quickly. This caused Chris to use a heavy object and strike Adea on the head until she lost her life. After the violent act, Chris disposed of Adea's body and went back home as if nothing happened. Of course, this version of events isn't set in stone because no one really knows what happened in the car on that fateful day. The only people who know are now gone forever. And sadly, the detectives or anyone from that matter will never really truly know what happened to Adea. Adea's family are heartbroken knowing that their daughter's killer will never be punished. Chris is guilty of Adea's murder, but he can never go through a trial or get sentenced. Chris will never get to stare at prison walls and think about why he did what he did, and Adea's family will never get to see their daughter become a movie star or work alongside her favorite actors and idols. She had so many dreams, and she was on her way to making those come true. But one day and one moment altered everything and ended her dreams once and for all. This case is just awful. To think that Adea's family will never get the closure they need to just move on with their lives is so heartbreaking. Adea did lose her life, but how and why? These questions will haunt the Shabani family for the rest of their lives. If there's anything to take away from this case, I'd say it's to hold on to the people that you can truly love and trust. Adea, well, she knew she couldn't trust Chris. He was two-timing two different women. A lot of times when we meet people like this, it's easy to think, maybe I'll be the one to change him or her, or maybe I'll be the one that they don't lie to or sneak around on. But this is rarely, if ever, the case. Guys, don't let yourselves be pulled down by untrustworthy people. If you can't be your whole, full self around others and know that they accept you for who you are, and know that they're going to, without a doubt, be with you through thick and thin, then what are we doing? Scummy people just aren't worth your time. And I wish Adea would have been able to figure that out sooner. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of True Crime Stories. I wanted to give a special thank you to a few channel members, including Marty Hardy, Justina Fowler, Maggie Gobet, and Crystal Milanowski. If you also want to become a member of the channel, you'll gain access to new videos sometimes days or weeks before they're uploaded to the public, and it is a great way to support the channel and help out. And I really appreciate those of you that have decided to do that. If you want to join, you can click that big join button below the video, or find the link down in the description. And don't forget, True Crime Stories t-shirts are now available, and you can grab one of those from a link down in the description as well. But as always, if you enjoyed this video, check out this other interesting case I covered, and don't forget to subscribe. It's totally free, and it just keeps you up to date with all my future videos. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Many young people have made the move to Los Angeles with dreams of making a name for themselves in film, despite the chances of those plans being realized being very low. Those who succeed usually go on to enjoy a prosperous and fulfilling career, but those who fail are either forced to return to their hometowns or keep trying in hopes that one day they'll get their big break. 21-year-old Juliana Redding was one such aspiring actress who moved from Arizona to Santa Monica in 2005. But her story would have a tragic ending with many twists and turns along the way. It's a case that's resulted in many people questioning whether justice was served, since the outcome was not what anyone expected. And today, Juliana's family must live with the knowledge that the criminal who took her life may never face the consequences of their heinous actions. Juliana grew up in Tucson, Arizona, where she attended South Point Catholic High School, and by all accounts, she had a great childhood. She was close with her family, and after graduating, she decided to move to California, as she had aspirations of becoming a model. But her real ambition was to own her own business one day, and she told her parents, Patricia and Greg, that she would like to open a boutique in the future. After arriving in Los Angeles, she kept in touch with her family on a regular basis. She would often call her parents and catch up and let them know how her plans were going. They would also text each other often, and on occasion, she would make the trip back to Tucson for a visit. By 2008, she was living alone in a bungalow in Santa Monica while she was studying at Santa Monica College. To make extra money, she worked as a hostess in a restaurant while looking for opportunities in modeling or acting. For the time being, Juliana seemed content with her situation. But all of that would change on the 16th of March of that year, when Patricia found out that she couldn't make contact with her daughter. What's known is that Juliana played a round of golf on the 15th of March, after which she returned to her bungalow and opted to spend the night in, watching TV, specifically Seinfeld reruns. The following evening, Patricia became increasingly concerned when she received a call from Juliana's neighbors, who informed her that they hadn't seen her at all that day, and her dog was seen inside her bungalow, but the place seemed completely deserted. Patricia repeatedly dialed her number in hopes that she would answer, but she never did, and also never returned any of her mother's calls. At first, she thought she may just be busy, but when she hadn't received a reply by 6 p.m., she knew something wasn't right. It was then that she decided it was time to call the police. Patricia explained the situation to investigators and asked whether they could do a welfare check, to which they agreed. Officers traveled to the bungalow and looked around outside, but saw nothing out of place or suspicious. Her car was still parked in the driveway, which suggested that she should be home, but the bungalow was silent. But when they entered the building, they knew something strange had happened. They noticed a candle burning in the bungalow's main entrance, and then immediately detected the odor of natural gas, which they then discovered was coming from the gas stove that had been left on, but the burner wasn't lit, meaning the entire room was now essentially a time bomb. Then they made an even more unsettling discovery. After searching through the house, they walked into the back bedroom, and here they found Juliana. Unfortunately, she was no longer alive. It didn't take detectives long at all to realize that she'd been strangled, but it was also obvious that she put up quite a fight against her attacker. From all indications, it seemed that a violent struggle had taken place throughout the apartment. This theory was confirmed when it was revealed that Juliana's DNA was present under her own fingernails, suggesting that she was attempting to remove her attacker's hands from her throat. There were very few clues as to who had ended her life, but one thing that was certain was whoever entered the apartment had plans to cover their tracks by blowing up the apartment. They'd hoped that the gas emanating from the stove would react with the lit candle, thereby creating an explosion that would have wiped out a lot of evidence at the scene. It's believed that thanks to the age of the building, the gas never had a chance to build up enough to cause an explosion. And before long, investigators started to piece together what they believed happened in the moments leading up to Juliana's death. They believed someone entered the bungalow at around 10 p.m. on the night of the 15th of March. After gaining entry, they attacked Juliana, and at some point had caused injuries to her head by hitting her against the floor. Since this was a prolonged attack, investigators believed that her assailant didn't expect her to put up such a fight, and in the end, they had to resort to strangulation. It would later be determined that Juliana attempted to contact emergency services at some point, as her phone records showed that she dialed 911, but the call ended before it could connect. The neighbors who'd contacted Patricia told officers that they heard the sounds of furniture being moved around and someone screaming at about 9:53 the previous night, but added that they hadn't seen anyone suspicious in or around the building. And it's certainly a shame they didn't take the situation more seriously, but you can't really blame them too much. Like they said, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, and it could have been a small party or something for all they knew. Evidence was collected from the scene of the crime, including several DNA samples that were found on the building's front door, the phone, Juliana's clothing, and on her throat. These samples were sent into a lab for analysis, but they would take some time to reveal who'd been inside her apartment. In the meantime, investigators interviewed Juliana's family and friends, who gave them as many details about her life as they could. When speaking to crime scene experts, Juliana's father suggested that they contact a man named John Gilmore, with whom Juliana had been in an on-again, off-again relationship. He added that he was concerned about Juliana when he found out they were dating, since Gilmore was known to have had a violent temper, which became all the more apparent when he kicked in her car door on one occasion, and had also forced his way into her apartment. When investigators heard this news, they felt like they finally found the lead they'd been hoping for. They immediately set out to locate John, and it didn't take long at all before they found their man. When John Gilmore was interviewed, he stated that he'd been to Juliana's place that Sunday morning, but got no answer at the door, despite her car being parked in the driveway. He looked in through the security gate, but could only see the burning candle, though he'd never smelled any gas. When asked about the violent incidents that they'd been told about, he admitted that he and Juliana had on occasion gotten into fights, one of which took place that Saturday night when they started arguing about his plans for the evening. He'd called her to tell her that he was planning on spending some time with some of his friends that night, and this must have irked her, since she abruptly ended the call. He claimed that she then decided to spend the evening with one of her own friends, and he ended up going to a house party at a residence a few miles from her apartment. While there was still some tension between them, they kept texting each other throughout the evening, but then at around 10 p.m., she stopped responding to his messages. When he still hadn't received any reply the following morning, he attempted to call her and sent several text messages, but again he got no response. This is when he went to her building, but had no choice other than to leave when he couldn't find her there. While he was certainly the first suspect, his name was soon cleared thanks to surveillance footage from the night of the attack. Security camera footage showed him visiting a convenience store and a Jack-in-the-Box restaurant. Several people from the house party were able to confirm that he was there when the attack took place, since they saw him there between 9:45 and 10:15 p.m. His innocence was fully confirmed when it was revealed that much of the DNA found in the apartment belonged to a woman, not a man. And police now had a lot of unanswered questions. They then started the task of speaking to all of the women in Juliana's life. There was suspicion that someone who knew her might have become jealous of her looks or her lifestyle, or that there was some sort of love triangle involved. Investigators collected DNA samples from everyone they spoke to, but this led nowhere, as no match was found for the samples that had been removed from her apartment. This is when they discovered that there was another man in the picture, a doctor by the name of Munir. Upon further investigation and questioning, investigators learned that Juliana and Munir had met each other while she was employed at a restaurant in 2007. She must have made quite an impression on him, since he offered her a job as a medical assistant and she readily agreed. Working as a hostess or a waitress in a restaurant obviously doesn't pay very well, at least not considering all the crap you have to deal with from patrons, and she must have jumped at the opportunity to earn a little more money. But their relationship wouldn't remain merely professional for long. Before too much time had passed, she agreed to move in with Munir, and during this time Munir would bring her gifts and allow her to live in his upscale house that was located in Beverly Hills. While this notion must have been flattering for a while, it didn't take long for Juliana to become concerned about Munir's behavior, as she started feeling as though he was obsessed with her. He told her that he wanted to buy her an expensive car when she turned 21, and at one stage he even suggested that they get married. There was no doubt that she would be left wanting for nothing, since he was a very wealthy man, but he was known to waste money on jewelry, cars, and women, which she found overwhelming and somewhat concerning. It's unclear if Munir simply got the wrong message from Juliana, or if he was making things out to be much more than they really were, almost some sort of delusional wishful thinking. But whatever the case, Munir's behavior only got stranger and stranger from here, and it didn't take Juliana long to realize she needed a way out. Juliana eventually got her wits about her and decided she needed to end the relationship with Munir, after which she relocated to the bungalow in Santa Monica, which was being paid for by her father. The pair parted ways on good terms, and they even stayed in touch, which is a little bit surprising. One of Juliana's friends would later reveal that she, Juliana, and Munir traveled to Las Vegas on one occasion to celebrate her friend's birthday. But all was not as it seemed, as her father started looking into Munir's background, and what he found was seriously startling. He discovered that Munir not only was married at the time of his supposed relationship with Juliana, but that he had 3 children who were living in Lebanon. He was certain that his family didn't know about Juliana or any of the other women that he'd been seen with, and so he relayed what he'd found to his daughter. She was taken aback and upset by the news, and immediately told him that she no longer wanted to see him, and she even told him to never speak to her again, which was probably the right move. While Juliana and Munir were no longer on good terms, her father, Greg, who was a pharmacist, still kept in touch with Munir, since they'd been working on a business deal together, but it never came to fruition as the deal fell through after Greg became concerned that Munir was running his business somewhat illegally. Evidence was quickly beginning to stack up against this man, and it quickly became clear he simply wasn't the man he portrayed himself to be. Investigators found it strange that Juliana had her life ended just a week after this deal had gone sour, and they soon started suspecting that Munir knew much more than he was letting on. But bear in mind, his DNA was not found at the scene of the crime. They were unable to interview him at the time, since he'd left the country, go figure, but they decided to start digging into his past in the meantime. Since he was known to have had a somewhat sordid history with women, they started looking at the women who'd worked for him in the past. They had a suspicion that the female DNA found at the crime scene may somehow be connected to Munir, but they had no proof to confirm these suspicions. Most of his former female employees were either no longer in touch with him or had no knowledge of Juliana. But when they looked into the history between him and a 47-year-old woman named Kelly Sue Park, they started to grow even more suspicious. He'd made several substantial payments to her, totaling over $1 million in just 18 months. She'd been involved in several of his business deals in the past while she was working as a real estate broker. While they were by no means certain that Park was connected to the attack on Juliana, they decided to have her followed in hopes that they could collect a DNA sample without her knowledge. If she was somehow connected to the crime, she may have alerted Munir to the fact that the authorities wanted to collect her DNA, and so it was decided that this should be done without raising any suspicions. Their patience eventually paid off when they were able to collect one of her discarded cigarette butts, and it was sent away to be analyzed. Before long, investigators were informed that they'd finally made a breakthrough in the case, as it was found that Park's DNA was a perfect match for the samples collected from Juliana's bungalow. There was now no doubt that Park was present when the attack was carried out, and there was a good chance that Munir was involved somehow, though he still hadn't returned to the US and so couldn't be questioned yet. Obviously, Park was apprehended and immediately charged with the crime against Juliana. It's believed that Munir found out about her arrest just a few days later, since he suddenly vanished into thin air, though it's believed at the time he was likely somewhere in Lebanon, possibly to avoid being tracked down by the police. The only problem was, the motive for Juliana's crime was still unclear. It was suggested that Munir didn't take kindly to their relationship coming to an end, or that he'd gotten upset when his business deal with her father fell through. So it was theorized that he'd hired Park to carry out the attack in retaliation. One of the most widely accepted theories was that Munir had instructed Park to intimidate Greg into accepting the deal they were working on, and that as part of this intimidation, she was to pay an unfriendly visit to Juliana in her apartment. But when Juliana started fighting back, Park was taken by surprise, and she ended up ending her life as the two women struggled for survival, though this was still just a theory. This would be a point that was brought up in court later on, as it was argued that Munir agreed to pay Park a six-figure sum to follow through with his plan. When news of Park's arrest made it to the media, the LA Times published details revealing that she was known to have had intimidated people in the past whenever they went against Munir's business plans. So it made sense that she may have been involved this time as well. On one occasion, she intimidated a bank manager who had also canceled a deal, and on another, she was told to intimidate one of his clients who'd failed to keep up with his payments as promised. But despite the wealth of evidence found in Juliana's bungalow, and DNA placing her at the scene, Park decided to plead not guilty to second-degree homicide charges. Her defense attorneys revealed that they would be willing to tell the court that the two women never met each other, and that the only connection between them was Munir, who was still out of the country. The prosecution, on the other hand, intended to reveal that Park had been hired by Munir as an enforcer, and that her attempt at intimidation ultimately led to Juliana's life being ended. But this didn't have the intended effect. The judge in this case ruled that this theory could not be used during the trial, since there was no solid evidence to back it up, and instead the state would have to rely on evidence found at the scene, including the DNA that was matched to Park. They would also mention the fact that Park stood nearly 6 feet tall, and that she was an intimidating and self-assured woman who could easily fulfill the role of an enforcer or intimidator if Munir ordered her to do so. This woman was genuinely scary to be around, and she apparently just had a personality and energy about her that was just difficult to get past. The evidence against Park had mounted, and it seemed all but certain that she would be found guilty of ending Juliana's life. Her DNA had been found in several places in the apartment, including on Juliana's clothes, inside the locks on the front door, on the telephone, and most incriminating of all, on her throat. On a plate that had been left in the kitchen sink, crime scene investigators found a drop of blood along with a fingerprint that belonged to Park. This, according to the prosecution, was undeniable proof that Park was inside the apartment that night, and since the two women didn't know each other, she would have no reason to be there, other than to carry out an attack as ordered by Munir. Furthermore, they believed it was indisputable that she had ended her life since her DNA was found on her throat, indicating that Park was the one who ended her life via manual strangulation. But pinning this woman for such a crime was much easier said than done. She wasn't going down without a fight, much like the night that she encountered Juliana in her apartment. Her defense team had more than a few tricks up their sleeve, and they were willing to pull out all the stops to get Park off the hook. Kelly Park's defense team had a different theory that they claimed cast doubt on the suggestion that she was in the apartment with Juliana on the night of the crime. Since there were no witnesses that night, they contended that there was too much uncertainty as to what had transpired, And furthermore, they theorized that Park's DNA could have ended up in the building through DNA transfer. This occurs when someone touches an item belonging to someone else, and that item is then found at a crime scene, resulting in an innocent person being suspected of a crime when it's discovered that their DNA is present. Another example of this is when an item is touched by two people, resulting in DNA from one person being transferred to the other. In other words, Park may have touched an item that was also touched by Juliana's killer, and they then unwittingly transferred her DNA to the crime scene. In this case, they made reference to a towel that was possibly used by Park when she was in Munir's Beverly Hills home 5 months earlier. They suggested that the killer committed the crime and then attempted to remove their fingerprints and DNA with the use of that same towel, transferring Park's DNA to the scene in the process. They mentioned that Park would have visited this house on several occasions since she was known to be a business associate of his, and since Juliana had lived in that same house at some point, Park's DNA might have inadvertently been transferred to Juliana's bungalow. When discussing Munir's role in the crime, the defense argued that a failed business deal with Juliana's father didn't seem like strong enough motive to have her life ended, and neither was the fact that she had ended their relationship. As for the large amount of money that was transferred from Munir into Park's bank account, they argued that these were simply payments that were owed to her, since she and Munir were known to have conducted business with each other. The prosecution revealed to the court that Munir had, in the past, boasted that he employed a woman who was the female equivalent of James Bond, and they built their case around the suggestion that she was paid to work as an assassin, and that Munir had more than enough motive to order a hit on Juliana. The case was just getting wilder and wilder, and some aspects of the court proceedings are just downright unbelievable. The LA Times reported that Park's telephone records showed that she called Juliana's place of work, and that she was present outside her bungalow the night before the attack was carried out. Since they had never met, there could only be one reason for Park to try and contact her: to figure out her schedule and to stake out her apartment while planning the attack. It was also alleged that Park and Munir had collaborated on a health insurance fraud scam, and that at the time it was still being investigated by authorities. The trial would last until 2013, an incredibly long time. But the verdict the jury reached on behalf of Park, it shocked everyone. After all the court proceedings had been carried out, the jury found Kelly Sue Park not guilty. Juliana's friends and family members who were present at the proceedings were outraged at the verdict and made their feelings known, shouting that she knew she was guilty and that something had gone terribly wrong while she was being led out of the courtroom. This meant that no one would be held accountable for the loss of Juliana's life, and that the one man connected to everyone involved in the case would not even be questioned since he couldn't be reached. This verdict, for all the painfully obvious reasons, must have had a devastating effect on her family, who only commented on the outcome via a written statement, in which they expressed their sadness and shock at the fact that justice had never been served. Worse yet, Lebanon doesn't have an extradition treaty with the United States, and the country does everything it can to protect its own citizens, meaning that as long as Munir stays put, he'll never face judgment for his actions. They found it unbelievable that the massive amount of evidence against Park and Munir wasn't enough to see them convicted. They've done their best to come to terms with the decision, and her mother, Patricia, now uses her daughter's room when she paints, helping her feel some small level of connection to her daughter, even after all these years have passed. She says that she's resorted to using art as a coping mechanism, since she produces her best work when she's emotional. At times, she feels as though she and Greg, along with their son Patrick, are still stuck in 2008 when the attack took place, since they still find it hard to believe that Park and Munir walked away scot-free. But thankfully, she's found new meaning in her life, since she remembers her daughter through her art, and after overcoming breast cancer, she started looking for the positive aspects of any obstacles she faces. As for Munir, it's believed that he joined his actual family in Lebanon after fleeing from the US, and today he still maintains he's innocent in the matter. He's never been charged or even questioned. He was placed under arrest in Germany in 2015, when it was suspected that he was committing medical fraud, but nothing ever came of this. It's alleged that he allowed a physician's assistant who had never attended medical school to perform surgeries when his patients were assured that he would be the one to perform the surgeries. More than 20 of his patients have come forward to report that they've been left with permanent damage as a result. For reasons unknown, he was released and then traveled to Lebanon once again, where he was again suspected of committing medical fraud. Park was also arrested in 2015 in the German case, when it was found that she was involved. She was charged with conspiracy, lying to patients, disfiguring patients in botched surgeries, and cheating insurance companies out of $150 million. She was eventually released on $1.5 million bail, and once again managed to slip out of the grasp of police. Juliana's case is one with no happy ending and no easy answers. Her family did their best to protect her from Munir when it became apparent that he was living a double life, but in the end, he walked away without so much as a slap on the wrist. Some may consider this to be an unsolved case, but I think we all know the truth here. Sometimes the justice system simply fails those who trust that due process will prevail, no matter the amount of solid evidence that's presented. One can only hope that lessons are learned from this case, and hopes that similar failures don't become commonplace in the future.